the objects. We also learn about arrays, math in strings, and so on and so forth. Next, we are going to be learning about the TDD. Now we are going to be working with the object utils.js. Okay, so let's start from the first one. We have to export const the deep merge, and it's gonna take the object to 1, and it's gonna also take the object obj2. And here inside there, first of all, we are going to be spreading out all of that objects. So object 1, and we're going to be storing them inside the result variable, and it should look something like this. Now we are going to be iterating over through our keys, so I'll just use like const key inside the object 2, and let's just check if the object, come on, object 2, and now we have to pass our key inside there, and the instance of object and the key in object 1. So in that situation, we have to get the result and pass our key inside there, and that's going to be equals to our deep merge function. Now we are calling our function inside our function, so this is a recursion, and pass our object 1 and pass our key inside there. And now we are going to be using our object 2 and pass our key inside that. Okay, so now for the else class, like that's not the case. So in that situation, we're going to be getting like the result key that's going to be equals to the object 2 and pass our key inside there. Now let me just save my file, and I'm going to close there. And now underneath this for loop, we are going to be just returning our result, so we can get the result of there. Now let me just hide there, and now we are going to be creating another function which will be our deep clown. It's going to take the object as a parameter, and now we are going to be only returning our json.parse, and here we have to pass our json.stringify and only pass our object inside there. So that's our deep clown. And finally we have to create our flatten object, so which will be flatten flatten object, and it's going to take the object as a parameter. It's going to also take the prefix, like how you want to flatten that. So now the initial value will be set to empty string, and now let me just save there. So now inside there, we have to first of all create an empty object and store that inside the result variable. And next we have to iterate over through the keys, so I'll just use like const key inside the object, and inside there, let's just first of all get the new key. So how in the world we are going to be getting there? We're going to be checking if we have the prefix. In this situation, we are going to be just rendering this prefix right here, and then dot, and then that key. But if that's not the case, we are going to be only returning the key. And I'm going to store the result of that inside the new key variable, which will look something like this. And now we have to check if our object, and now let's just pass our key inside there, if our object.key and the type of object, come on, object key is equal to the objects. In this situation, we're going to be making first of all the clone of our result, and then we're going to be attaching this flatten object, and this is a recursion now we are using. And now let's just pass our object and pass our key inside there, and now let's just use our new key like so, and I'm going to store the result of that inside the result variable. And now let's just save our file. We already defined this result right here, and now we're assigning this new value to this result variable. But if that's not the case, in that situation, we are going to be getting the result and then the new key, and that's going to be equal to the object then key. Okay, now let me just save my file, and finally from this for loop underneath there, we are going to be returning the result like so. And now let's just save our file. I'm gonna collapse there, and now the next thing that we have to do is that we have to test this code. I'm gonna go ahead and go to my test file and create my object utils.test.ts or JS rather. Now let me just save this file, and the first thing that we have to do is that we have to get the describe, the it, and also the expect. And now underneath there we have to get a few functions which we just created from the src folder, and we have to grab that from the object utils. So we are going to be getting the deep merge, the deep clown, and also the flatten object. So now let's just save there, and now underneath there we have to provide our describe or describe our test suite. So I'll just give the name of like object utilities or utils would be fine, and define my first one with like it should deep merge objects. And now inside there, let's just create a few objects. So I'll just create like a, and a will be set to 1, and then create a b will be set to a nested object, and I'm going to pass like the x value of 2, and I'm going to store that inside the object 1 variable like so. Next we have to create another object 2, and it's going to be equals to like b, and b will have this nested object with the property of y and the value of 3, and I'm going to also pass a c value, and it's going to be set to 4. Now we are going to be providing our expectation like deep merge, and here let's just pass our object 1 and also the object 2 inside there, and we want them to be equal to this result like a will be set to 1, and then b will be set to this nested object like x value will be set to 2 and the y value will be set to 3. Outside from there we are going to be passing the c value, and that's going to be set to 4. And now let me just save my file, test this out, and here you can see our test is now successfully passing and it is working the way we expect him to work. So now let me just collapse there, and now underneath there we have to test this deep clown function. So I'll just go ahead and define my it like it should deep clown an object, and here inside there we are going to be creating first of all our object like the a property will be set to 1, the b property will be set to a nested object, and now we are going to be passing a c as a 3. And yeah, I guess that's going to be fine. And here let's store the inside the object variable, and we should look something like this. Now we are going to be clowning there. So to clown there we are going to be using our deep clown function and pass our object which we just defined right here inside there. Okay, so I'm going to store the inside the clowned variable, and we should look something like this. Now we are going to be passing our expectation and pass my clown, and we want it to be equal. I'm gonna have to copy this clone and place it right here, or you know what, it should be just clone. So now let me just change that to clone and to be equal to this object. Underneath there we have to pass or expect void or clone and not to be object. So now let's just save our file, and here you can see our test is now successfully passing, and this is how our code should work. Now let me just hide there, and the next thing that we have to do is that we have to test our final function, which will be a flatten object function. So I'm gonna go there, and here let's just pass our test suite like it should flatten an object. And here inside there we are going to be first of all creating our object like a will be set to 1, b will be set to this c property of 2, and I'm gonna also pass like d, and d will be set to this nested e1 nested object like e will be set to 3. Okay, so I'll just pass like object, and it's going to be not object 1 but object would be fine. And now we have to pass our expectation, call our flatten object, and pass our object inside there, and we want that to be equal to this object like a will be set to 1, and then we are going to be getting like b.c property which will be set to 2, and now we are going to be getting b.d.e property and which will be set to 3. Okay, so now let me just provide like 3 right here. Now let me just save my file and test this out. So here you can see all of our tests are now successfully passing, and that was it about our first challenges, and that was the basics of testing in VTest. So we already learned about the AAA. Now let's talk about the TDD. So what is a TDD and why should you even care about that? So TDD or test driven development is a way of writing your code where you first write a test for your code, then write the code to make the test pass, and finally refactor your code while keeping your test passing. I know that was a lot of gibberish, but now let me just break this down for you. So how that's gonna look like? First of all, you're going to be writing your test. So think about what you want your code to do and then write a test for your code. After that, run your test. But in this case, your test will fail because you don't even have your actual code, so your test will fail. After that, you would need to write some code, so just write enough code so it will make your test pass. After that, you have to run your test again, and in this case your test should pass because your code works as expected. Then you have to refactor your code, so clean up your code if needed and make sure your test still passed. After that, repeat that process again and again, and this is what we call a TDD. If you still don't get it, so here is the final definition. You would first of all write your test, then you would write your code, then you would make your test pass, refactor your code, and repeat that. So that was the entire flow of TDD or test driven development. So now let me just write some code, then you will get to know what I'm talking about. Okay, so now let's just implement that TDD in action. So I want you to imagine a scenario where you will create a function which will add two numbers. So we already know that how we are going to be doing that. We can write a code for that, we can write a test cases for that. But I want you to just imagine for a second like this is something that we can do. If you want to do that by using the TDD approach, so first of all we are going to be creating a test case for that, then we are going to be writing a code for that. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my test and create my mathutils.test.js file. So what do you want to do? We want to create a function that adds two numbers. Okay, so this is what we are going to be doing right now. So first of all, let's just write a test cases for that. So we are going to be importing the describe, also the it, and also the expect cases. So now underneath there, we are going to be using our describe. We are now describing the add function. And now for the second value, let's just remove there, and inside there provide our test case right here, like it should add two numbers. Yeah, that would be fine. Now let's just save there, and inside there we are going to be providing our expect case, and here let's just say like we are going to be passing our add function, which will take like 1 and 2, and the result we want to expect there to be 3. Okay, so these are just our expectation, and of course our test will fail. And why is that? Because we don't even have our add function. We did not write any code for that, so that's why our test will successfully fail. Okay, so yeah, this is just our testing scenario, and now let's just write a code for that. I'm gonna go ahead and go to my src file and define my mathutils.js file right here. Now we are going to be writing our code, and let's just hope it works. So we are going to be using like cons, and then add will be the name of my function, which will take a and b as a parameter. And now we are going to be using like a and a plus b, so it's going to give us the result of there. I'm going to export there. Let's just save our file and import there right here. So I'll use that import add from where from. Let's just go ahead and go to my src directory, and inside there we have our mathutils. Check this out. Yep, our test is now successfully passing, and it is also passing right here, but all of that code should be gone. Let's just refresh there, and yeah, our test is now successfully passing, which means like everything is working the way we expect him to work. Our test is passing, our code is working. Now it's time to refactor our code. That's going to be the third step. Okay, so sometime we would need to refactor our code, but in a majority of time we would not. So I'll just remove that from here, and I'm going to just return like that a plus b. But here we are going to be also checking the edge cases. That was the only reason I choose JavaScript over the TypeScript, because I want to show you these cases. Okay, so if you weren't using JavaScript, I mean like if you weren't using TypeScript, so this is what you would have to do. Okay, so first of all you would have to check like if the type of a is not equals to the number, so let's just provide there, or the type of b does not equals to the number. So in that situation we have to throw an error, so I'll use like throw new error, and I'm gonna say like both arguments must be numbers. And now let's just save our file. Okay, now that we successfully refactor our code, so I'm gonna go ahead and go to my test cases and provide a bit of test to this. So this is going to be our expectation, but now underneath there let's just provide another test case. So it should throw an an error if arguments are not numbers. And now let's just provide our expect cases. So here we already know that we are going to be throwing an error, so which means like we have to use our callback function and use our add function. And let's suppose we have like 1 and then 2 as a string value, and we want the result to throw throw both arguments must be numbers. And now let's just save that. I'm going to duplicate there a few times, so let's just change the first one to be a string. So I'll just write like 1 as a string, and I guess that's going to be fine. And I'm going to also change that to like that's going to be fine, but I'm going to change this value to no. Check out my test cases, so which means like everything is working the way we expect him to work, and yeah, everything is now successfully passing. So this is how we are going to be performing the TDD. And if you want to perform that challenge by yourself, you can definitely go ahead and do that challenge by yourself. But first of all, we are going to be writing a test case, then we will write a bit of code to pass that test. After that we are going to be writing after that we are going to be checking our test. If our tests are now successfully passing, then if you wanted to refactor our code, we can definitely do that. But if you don't, so we don't have to. Now let's talk about the matchers. So far we've been using only the 2b, but now we are going to be learning about a lot of matchers. Like we're going to be learning about the equality matcher, truthiness matcher, number, string, object matchers, and so much more. So let's start. I'm gonna go ahead and define a file, create a file with the name of matchers.test.js. and here we are going to be learning about a lot of matchers. First of all, we have to import the expect. We also have to import the add. Okay, so we're not going to be writing any describe because we're going to be only learning about the matchers. And now let's just learn about them. So I'll just write like it and 2b matchers. So let's just start from the first one, which is called the 2b. So you know what, let me just write a definition of the. First of all, so we have a 2b, and the definition will look something like this. It will check for the strict equality. Like you can think about there as like triple equal to operator as we use in JavaScript. So meaning both values must be the same type and value. we already discussed that inside the JavaScript. So whenever we use like triple equality operator, which means like the value and the type should be the same, otherwise it's going to give us an error. So that's exactly what this to be will do for us. So I'll just use like const result is going to be set to 5, and here we have to just write like expect, and then here we have to pass our result right here to be 5. So now in this case our test will successfully pass, as we see there, and here you can see, let's just refresh there, our test will now successfully pass. And why is that? That's because the value and also the types are totally equal, so that's why we are now getting the passing test. But now if I change that to like, I don't know, maybe a string, save this file, so here you can see our test will now fail. So that was our to be. Now let's talk about another one, which is called the to equal. So let's just write to equal, and I'm going to also change the definition of there. So I'm going to just remove there, and the definition will look something like this. It will check for the deep equality, and which means like it compares the values by checking the content of objects or arrays, not just their reference. So how that's going to look like, let me just change that to like to equal, and I'm going to just remove that from here, and I'm going to define two objects. So I'll use like object 1 is going to be equals to the name, and the name will be set to, I don't know, my own name, and also the age will be set to 22. I'm going to duplicate there and change the name of that to like 2, and here we have to pass our object 1 to be, not to be like, but to equal as object 2. So now if I save there, let's just refresh there. Okay, now it's working. As you can see, our tests are now successfully passing because we are now checking both the reference and also the values of these objects right here. So we are now checking like expect the object 1 value or content to be as the object 2 or to be equal to the object 2. So let's suppose if I change that to like, I don't know, maybe 12, and here you can see our test will now fail. And why is that? Because the content is now different from this object 2, so that's why we are now getting an error. So that was the to equal, and now let's talk about the to strict equal. Okay, so we have another one which is called a to strict, and I'm going to also remove the definition of that. So it will check for deep equality, just like to equal, which we just saw a few seconds ago, but also consider properties like undefined, function, and others, and other types that are not strict equal in certain cases. And now let me just change that to like to strict equal, and it will work exactly the same. But now let's suppose if I want to change like, I don't know, maybe the type of that, I'm going to change the type of that to like string. Now let me just save my file and refresh there, and here you can see our test will fail. And let's suppose if I just add something else like, I don't know, maybe a something, save this file, still our test will fail. Okay, so that was it about for the equality measures, and you don't even have to worry about that because all of them are now available inside the VTest. So you have to just search for that, click on the VTest, and they are available right here. So if I go to the guide, and we have to go to the API, and here inside this API we have a lot of measures, but if I click on there, and now we can see those measures right here. We have to be close, and to be defined, truthy, falsy, none, and there are a lot of measures that you can explore by yourself, but I'm going to show you those which you will use like a lot of times. Okay, so you know what, I'm gonna just, why did I just delete there? I'm gonna have to only delete there and also there. Now let's talk about another one which is called the to be truthy. So to be truthy. This measure will check if the value is truthy or falsy. If you guys don't know the concept of truthiness and falsiness in JavaScript, so well, let me just explain that right here. But if you do so, you already get the idea. So in JavaScript, only these values which I am about to write are falsy values, and other than that, every single thing is truthy. So these are now the falsy values. So false is a falsy value, 0 is a falsy value, null is a falsy value, empty string is also a falsy value, and it doesn't matter if you use like single quotes or double quotes or backticks, but if they are empty, so which means like they are a falsy values. We have undefined. undefined is also falsy, and NaN is also a falsy. So basically this matcher will check whether the value is truthy or falsy. If our value gives us the result of any of these, so which means like our value is falsy. But if our value is not inside this list, so which means like our value is truthy. So now let's just use there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use like const value, and that's going to be set to like 1 maybe. And now we are going to be expecting the value to be truthy, and here let's just not pass anything. Okay, so we already know what a truthiness and falsiness means, and let me just go ahead and check this out. So here you can see our tests are now successfully passing. And why is that? And it should be the to be matcher or to be truthy matcher. And why is that? Because 1 is a truthy value, that's why it's going to give us the passing test. But if I change that to like either empty string, now our test will fail. Or if I change that to like 0, still our test will fail. If I change that to like NaN, and now let's just refresh that, still our test will fail. Okay, so that was our to be truthy value or matcher, whatever you want to call it. So that was the to be truthy. We also have the to be falsy. Come on, to be falsy. There we go. I'm gonna select that. Now it's gonna pass our test. And why is that? Because NaN or not a number is also a falsy value. So that's why our test is now passing. And if I just set that to like null maybe, let me just change that to null. And here you can see still our test is now passing. And why is that? Okay, what the hell? I just look at those favicons and I thought like I opened them in 2 tabs, so that's why I closed them. So if I change that to like maybe 1, so now our test will fail because 1 is not a falsy value. 1 is a truthy value. That's why we're now getting this error right here. Now let's talk about the greater and less than and all of that matchers. So they are a math related matchers. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just write like 10, and here we are now passing that 10, but I'm going to change that to like result maybe. And here let's just use the to be greater. Okay, so to be greater than 5. So what are we doing? We are now taking this 10 value and we are now passing that right here, and we are now checking like is 10 greater than or less than 5. Okay, so if it is greater than 5, so it's going to give us check. But if that's not the case, so it's going to give us false. Our test is now successfully passing because 10 is greater than 5. That's why our test is now successfully passing. But if I change that to like to be less than 5, less than, yeah, so our test will now fail. So we have like to be less than or equal to, and we also have to be greater than or equal to. So let me just use like to be less than, come on, less than or equal. Oh, I'm using HEN, should be AN. To be less than or equal to 5. So now we are checking like is 10 greater than, I mean like 10 less than or equal to 5 or not. And here you can see it's gonna fail because 10 is not less than 5 or equal to 5. 10 is 10. 10 is not neither less nor equal to 5. So that's why our test is now failing. So if I use like to be greater or equal, now if I save my file, and now if you check this out, so our tests are now successfully passing. And why is that? Because 10 is greater than or equal to 5. Okay, so that's them. And there are a lot of matches that you can explore by yourself. And now let me show you one more, which is called the to contain, and which is related to the string. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and I'm going to just define that result variable once again, and I'm going to only provide like hello comma word right here. And now we are going to be using the matcher which is called the to contain. And here let's just provide our hello right here. So what is this to contain does? This to contains will check the result, and it's going to check for a specific value inside that string. So is this value available inside this string or not? Yes, of course, hello is already available inside the result. So it's going to pass our test, as you can see right here. So now our test is now successfully passing. But now if I just provide like my own name, maybe Hussein, and here you can see the test is now failing. Why is that? Because Hussein is not available inside this string, and that's why it will not give us the value of that. There is also yet another one which is called the to match. So I'm going to use like to match. It's going to take a regular expression, or regex for short. If you guys don't know what a regex means, you don't even have to worry about that. So I'm going to just write like search for this entire string and search for only this word. and I'm going to also provide I. If that is either lowercase or uppercase, then pass, or we don't have to provide this I right here. So I'm going to just provide this word. So we want you to search for this entire string, and inside that string we want to search for the word, and our test will fail. Why is that? Because here you can see the W is lowercase, but if you just provide that as a uppercase and refresh there, and here you can see we are now providing uppercase W, and it should be word. There we go. God damn it. And now here you can see our test is now successfully passing. So that's done. Now let's talk about the to equal one. We have another one which is called the to have the property, and we usually use that for the objects, like is the object have a certain property or not. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just remove that from here, and I'm going to use like const object, and here inside this object I'm going to provide like name, and name will be my own name. So I'm going to use like Hussein, age of 22. Let's just save this file, and now underneath that, here we have to provide our expectation. So I'll use like expect, there we go, and provide our objects inside there. And now let's just use to have property, and then here we have to provide the property name, like name. Is this name property available inside this object or not? If it is available, so it's going to give us, it's going to pass our test. But if it is not available, so it's going to fail our test. Here you can see our test is now passing. But if I, let's suppose, search for the location and save this file, and now it's going to give us an error because location property is not available inside this object. And we also have a few more methods like to be defined and to be undefined. So let's suppose we want to search for this value. Is this value defined or undefined? So I'm going to use like dot name, and here I'm going to use like to be undefined, or to be defined rather, and I'm going to execute there, and it will pass our test because this name value is defined inside this object. And now here you can see our test is now successfully passing. But if I change that to like to be undefined and save my file, and now it's going to give us an error. So yeah, that was a lot of methods, and once again you can check all of these out by yourself, and there are a lot. And I mean there are a lot. Okay, now let's talk about the positive and negative testing. So let's just start from the first one, which is called the positive testing. So it will check if the system behaves as expected when provided with the valid inputs. So in positive testing, you are testing the system with correct or valid inputs, ensuring that the system function as expected when used correctly. So on the other hand, we have a negative testing. So it will check if the system handles invalid or unexpected inputs correctly. In negative testing, you are providing an incorrect or invalid inputs to ensure that the system can handle error scenarios gracefully and it doesn't crash or behaves unexpectedly. So that was just the definition of a positive and negative testing. So how that's gonna look like. First of all, we have our add function which takes like a and b as a parameter, and now we are checking like if a is not a number or if the type of b is not a number. So in that situation, we want to throw an error which will say like both input must be numbers, and then finally we are just returning a plus b, and that's our function. Now if you want to provide a positive testing for that, so we are going to be providing a valid inputs like passing 3 and 5, and we are now expecting that to give us the result of add, and 3 plus 5 will give us add, and then we are providing a 10 and 20, and it's going to give us 30, and now we are providing 0 and 0, so it's going to give us 0. And that was our positive testing. But now let's talk about the negative testing. So here you can see we are now providing a negative values like 3 and also 5, but 5 is now a string value. But if that is the case, so we want to just throw an error which will say like both inputs must be numbers. And here you can also see like we are now providing a as a string, and we are providing a 5 as a second value. So still we are going to be saying like both inputs must be numbers. And now here you can see for the third one, we are now providing an undefined and null. So in that situation, we are going to be throwing an error once again. So that was just a quick theory about the positive and negative testing. So now let me just write some code, then you will get to know what I'm talking about. Let me go ahead and go to my math, and here you can see I have exactly that same function which is now checking like the a parameter and also the b parameter, and also just finally returning a plus b. Now let me provide a few test cases for the like the valid and invalid or positive and negative testing. So I'll just use like math.test.js file, and now let's just import our describe function, our it function, and also our expect function. There we go. And we would also need to import our add from where? Add from our math module. Let's just go to our src and math. Now here we are going to be describing our function. So I'll just give the name of like math, and here let's just provide our it should add valid numbers. Come on, valid numbers. Now here in this case we are providing you know what, let's just remove there. And now here in this case we are working with the positive testing. So you want to expect. So let's just provide our add and provide our 3 and 5 to be add. Okay, so let's just come on, if I can type that today. So it's going to give us the result of add. Now let me just duplicate that 2 more times, and we want to pass the value of like 10 and also 20 to this one, and we want the expected value to be 30. Now here let's just provide another expectation like 0 for the first parameter and 0 for the second one, and the result will be 0. Okay, so now if I save there and my test is running, and I can see all of the tests successfully passing. So that was our positive testing. But now let's talk about how we can specify a negative testing for that. So I'll just use another it, and it should add invalid input fields or inputs rather. And here we are going to be expecting if add, and here we have to specify 3 value and 5 as a string value. If that is the case, we are going to be throwing a new error. So throw error, and here we will just say like both inputs must be numbers. Okay, let's just go back. Come on, go back. Oh my god, go back. There we go. And I'm going to duplicate that, and for the second input I'm going to just convert that to a, and inside the string a, and also here let me just convert that to 5, and also this one to undefined and null. Okay, so I'm going to just convert that to null, save my file, and test this out. So here you can see both of my tests are now successfully passing. So this is how we are going to be providing a positive test, and this is how we are going to be providing a negative test. Now let's talk about the boundary testing. So boundary testing focuses on testing the edges or boundaries of an input values. So the primary idea behind the boundary testing is that errors are more likely to occur in the boundaries, in the extreme end of the input ranges. By testing the boundaries of an input values, you can find defects that occur when the system handles these edge cases. I know that was a crazy definition of boundary testing, but trust me, it's not that hard. So now let's talk about the types of boundary testing. So the first type we have is a minimum boundary, which will test the smallest possible valid value. Then we have a maximum boundary, which will test the largest possible valid value. Then we have a just inside the boundary, and it will test above the minimum or just below the maximum. Then we have a just outside the boundary, so it will test just below the minimum or just above the maximum to ensure the invalid values are correctly rejected. So that was just the types of boundary testing, but now let me just give you an example of that. So just consider a simple function that accepts a username and a password, where the username must be at least 3 characters and the password must be at least 6 characters. So this is how we can solve that by using the boundary testing. So for the username boundary, we can provide the minimum valid username like 3 characters, and the minimum invalid username will be 2 characters, and just inside the valid will be 3 characters, and just outside the invalid will be set to 1 character. So that was just it about for the username boundary. But we can also provide for the password boundary. So the minimum valid password will be 6 characters. The minimum invalid password will be set to 5 characters. Just inside the valid will be set to 6 characters, and just outside the invalid will be set to 4 characters. Okay, so if you guys don't get it, you don't have to worry about the boundary testing. But now let me just write some code, then you will get to know what I'm talking about. Okay, so now let's see that boundary testing in action. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a file inside the src. So I'll use like valid or validate. Come on, validate password.js. And here we are going to be creating our function inside this. So I'll use like password, or you know what, validate password, and it's going to take a password as a parameter. And now inside this function, first of all, we are going to be checking if the password which we are now taking as a parameter dot length, length, is less than 8 characters, or password dot length is greater than 16 characters. So in that situation, you want to throw in error. So I'll use like new error, and it's going to say like password must be between 8 and 16 characters. 16 characters. There we go. So now let me just save my file. But if that's not the case, so what do you want to do in that situation? Then we just want to return like password is valid. There we go. And now let's just save our file. I'm gonna close there. Now let me go ahead and go to my test folder, and here we are going to be creating our validate password.test.js file, and inside there let's just import our describe function, our it function, and also our expect function. And also we want to import our validate password from where, from our src folder, and then we have our validate password. Now underneath that let's just provide our describe, and I'm gonna give it the name of like validate password, and inside there let's just use our it should allow a password with exactly 8 characters. And now let's just use this. So I'm going to use like validate password, and here I'm going to use like A B C D E F G H. So it is, I guess, 8 characters. So we have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 characters. Yeah, so I'm going to also store the inside the variable. So I'm going to use like result is going to be equals to this validate password, and now we have to provide our expectations. So provide our expect, and here we have to pass our result inside there to be password is valid. Okay, so now let me just save my file. Let me go ahead and go to my file, and password is valid. I'm gonna copy this in exact string, and now let me just paste it right here, save my file, and we are getting an error. I don't know why, but we are now getting this error. Oh, that's because we are not exporting there. So now let me go to the top and export there, save my file, and now everything should be fine. Here you can see we're now providing 8 characters, so that's why our test is now passing. But if I just provide like maybe 3 characters, our test is now failing, and now we are getting like password must be between 8 and 16 characters. So now let's just go back, and that's done. Let me create another test suite. So I'm going to use like it should throw an error if password has less than 8 characters. There we go. So in that situation, it's going to just throw an error. Go back, and here let's just provide our expectation because it's going to throw an error. So in that situation, let's just use our arrow function and provide our validate password. And here we have to provide like ABC right here and to throw. And it's going to throw this error like password must be between 8 and 16 characters. Let me just save my file. And now we are providing an ABC right here. And let's just test this out. And here you can see it's also passing right here, which means like everything is working the way we expect him to work. And these are just the boundaries which we are now providing right here, the boundary test. So let's just create another one. It should allow a password with exactly 16 characters. Okay, so I'm going to use like validate password, and I'm going to provide a lot of stuff to here. So maybe A B C D E F G H I J K L M N O P. And how many characters is this? 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16. Yep, that's fine. So I'm going to store them inside the result variable. And now let's just use our expectation. So provide our result to be password is valid, and save my file. And yep, this test is also passing because we are now providing 16 characters. I can't even speak today. So if I just remove it, and here you can see our test will fail. So let me just provide that 16 characters right here, and we are going to be also providing one more for it. So I'll use like it should throw an error if password has more than 16 characters. There we go. Provide our expectation, and here inside they provide our validate password. And let's suppose if you have more than these stuff, so I'm gonna copy there, place there, and I'm going to just provide like PQ, and it's gonna throw an error, and error will say like password must be between 8 and 16 characters. Now let me just save my file, and here you can see all of our tests are now successfully passing. So that was just example number 1, but now let me also give you yet another example, so which will be validate index. So I'm gonna go ahead and create another file with the name of is valid or valid index.js file, and here inside there we will just create a function. I'm gonna also export there because I always forget there, and is valid index. we're going to be just checking for the array and index inside the array. Okay, so here let's just check if our index is less than 0 or our index is greater than or equal to array.length. Okay, double R-A-Y, array.length. So in that situation, what do we have to do? We have to throw new error, which will say like index out of bounds, like for the boundaries. And now underneath there, if that isn't the case, we are going to be returning like invalid is or index is valid. There we go. And now let's just save our file. And also don't forget this explanation mark. You have to provide them. I'm gonna remove all of them and provide my test case right here. So it should be is valid index.test.js file. I'm gonna go ahead and first of all import my describe it and also the expect, and then we are going to be importing the is valid index from where? From our src. Go to the src and then is valid index right here. Now let's just define or describe our function suite. So is valid index, and here let's just remove that second from there and use const array and define our array right here like 10, 20, 30, 40 and save my file. And then we are going to be checking our suite. So it should allow index 0 first element. Okay, so yeah, if you provide 0, so it's going to give us the first element from our array. So I'm going to use like not index db. What the hell am I doing? I'm going to have to copy this name, place it right here, and provide my array inside there, which we are now creating right here, and 0 like so. And I'm going to use const result is going to be equals to this function call and provide my expectation, and here let's just provide our result to be index is valid. If that is the case, so we want to provide like index is valid. Check this out. Yep, it is working the way we expect him to work. And also create a few more boundary tests for it. So I'm going to use like it should allow index. So that's going to be the last one, last element. There we go. And here we can use like const result, and here let's just use is valid index and provide my array inside there and 4. Okay, so provide my expectation, provide the result to be index is valid. If that is the case, even check this out. Yep, it is also passing. And I'm going to just maybe duplicate there 2 times and here change the values inside there or even the messages. Okay, so this one should be come on, it should throw an error for index -1. Okay, out of bounds. And here I'm going to just specify a few things because here we are going to be using our expect and provide our callback function today because we are going to be throwing an error. So let's just use our is valid index, provide our array and -1, so out of bound to throw. And here we have to provide like index out of bounds, like for the boundaries. Now underneath there, I'm going to just remove all of them from here, and it should throw an error for index 5. Come on, 5. And it should be out of bounds as well. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just remove both of them, provide my expectation. Here we have to provide our function is validate index and provide our array and 5 inside there to throw. So in that situation we are going to be using index out of bounds and save my file. Check this out. Okay, so we are getting some sort of error, index out of bound, but here we are now providing this dot, so that's why we have to remove this dot, save our file, and now here you can see all of the tests are now successfully passing. So yeah, that was our boundary testing. Let's talk about the parameterized testing, and this word is super hard to pronounce, but I'm gonna do my best. So parameterized tests allow you to run the same test with multiple set of inputs without duplicating the test logic. Instead of writing multiple similar test cases for different inputs, you define the inputs as a set of parameter, and the test will automatically run for each combination of those values. So that was just a quick definition, but here you can see I have a function which will allows us to multiply 2 numbers. So if you want to write a lot of test cases for there, so we can, like nothing is stopping us. But if you want to use the parameterized testing, so this is how we are going to be using there. First of all, we have our describe, and now inside the describe we are not calling our it function, we are now calling our each method on our it function. So here we can pass our array, and inside that array we can pass our value for our parameters. Here you can also see we have a placeholder of %d. It will take those values from those tests and it will put it right there. If you don't get it, you don't have to worry about that, because now I'm going to show you that in action. Okay, so now let's see that parameterized testing in action. So first of all, I'm going to create a file with the name of math.js, and I'm going to also create a test file for that. So I'll use like math.test.js, and I'm going to close this getignore file. And now let's just create our multiply function inside this. So I'll use like const multiply. It's going to take a and b as a parameters, and now we are going to be using a times b. Okay, so let's just use that. I'm going to save this file, and now we have to import that right here. First of all, we are going to be importing the describe function. So let's just use the describe, then the it, and also the expect function. And now we are going to be using the multiply from our math module. So I'm going to just describe my set, and I'm going to give it the name of like multiply. And now inside there we are going to be using our it, but we are not going to be calling there. I'm going to just use dot, and here you can see we have a lot of function, like we have apply, bind, and so on and so forth. I'm going to only call this each function. Okay, so now let me just execute there, and here you can see it takes a test cases, and which will be a read only. Okay, so I'm going to paste my array inside there, and now here we are going to be passing our test cases, like value for our test cases. So I'll use like for the first parameter I'm going to pass 2, and for the second one I'm going to pass 3, and for the result I'm going to pass 6. So it's going to give us like 2 times 3 is equal to 6. Okay, so it's going to give us that result. So now let me just remove that from here. I want to pass a few more ones, so I'm going to provide my comma, and I'm going to just duplicate that a few times. Okay, so you know what, let's just change there to like 4 maybe, and this one to 5, and this one to 20. So it's going to give us the result of 20. And also I'm going to pass 7 here, 8, and here the result will be set to 56. Okay, so now let's just provide our 1 and 0. Come on, 0. So we already know this is going to give us 0 value. Let me just duplicate that for the final time. And here I'm going to paste like -2, here 3, and here -6. So let's just paste there. I'm going to save this file right now. But also we have to call our function, like immediately invoke function expression like ify. If you guys don't know what a ify is in JavaScript, you don't even have to know that. But yeah, if you want to call that function, so this is how we are going to be calling there. So for the first parameter, we are going to be providing our description. So I'll just say like should return correct result when multiplying. Now we are going to be using these placeholders % symbol and also d, and I'm going to use and once again %d, and then the expected, and here we have to use that %d one more time. Let's just go back. Let me just save my file. So this is how it looks like. So basically it's going to take that 2, it's going to put that right here, then it's going to take that 3, it's going to put that right here inside this placeholder, and then finally it's going to take this 6, it's going to put that right here. Same will goes for the 4, 5, 20, and so on and so forth. So this is what's going on right now. So I'm going to provide a comma here, and now we have to provide our functions. For our function, now that we know that it takes 3 parameters, so we are going to be passing 2, and then 3, and then 6. Okay, so for that, let's just pass like a comma b. And then here we have to specify our expected. You can basically give it any name that you prefer, but in my case I just give it the name of like a, b, and expected result. Now here we have to pass our expect, and I'm going to be passing my multiply inside there and pass my a comma b, which is now coming from these parameters. And now we have to use the to be, and let's just pass our expected result right here. Now let me just save my file, and now let's just run our test. So I'm going to use like npm run test and then ui. So let's just run, and here you can see our tests are now successfully passing right here. Okay, as you can see there, multiplying 2. Okay, here you can see. So we are now getting that result, and as I said, like those placeholder will be replaced by those actual values. So here you can see for this pound symbol, not pound symbol but % symbol with d, it is now replaced with this 2, and then same will goes for this one, as you can see there right here, and same will goes for this one as well. Okay, so yeah, this is how we are going to be providing a parameterized test for our code. But that was our first example. Now let me give you one more example. I'm going to go ahead and go to my src file once again, and I'm going to create another file with the name of string validator.js. Okay, I hope the spelling is correct. So let's just write like string validator.test.js file right here. I'm going to go into my string validator file, and let's just create our is valid string length, and here is going to take a string as a parameter, Now inside there, first of all, let's just export there because I always forget there. Let's just check if our string.length, come on, length, if our string.length is less than 5 or our string.length is greater than 10. So in that situation, we are going to be throwing this new error, which will say like string length must be between 5 and 10 characters. If that is not the case, then we are going to be returning like string is valid and provide this pound symbol right there. So this is our function. Now we have to provide a test cases for this. So I'm going to go into my test file, and the first thing that I want to do is that I want to import the describe and also the it, and also now let's talk about how we are going to be testing an asynchronous code, like those code which will take some time. So let me just give you example of that. First of all, we are going to be creating our file with the name of fetch data. We are not going to be actually fetching our data, but this is just an example. So I'm going to also go to the test file and create my fetch data.test.js file. Okay, so first of all, let's just go to our fetch data file, and here we are going to be creating our function. So I want you to imagine like we have some sort of asynchronous function, fetch data function, that will simulate the API request and return the promise. So how that's going to look like, this is how it's going to look like. So I'll just export this function because I always forget that. And now let me just use like fetch data. I'm going to give it the name of like fetch data, and that's going to be an asynchronous function, which means like it's going to take some time. And now we're going to be returning a new promise from there, and it's going to take the resolve, and it's going to also take the reject, even though we are not going to be using the reject, but yeah, we are going to be providing there right there. And I'm going to also use like set timeout, and it's going to take a while to run. So here inside there, for the duration, I'm going to give it like maybe 1 second would be fine. Here we're going to be calling our resolve function, and it's going to say like data fetched successfully, full-ly, there we go, success, success, there we go. Oh god damn it, successfull-y. Now this is looking better. So this is just our basic asynchronous function, and it returns a promise. So how in the world we are going to be testing this code? Let me go ahead and go to my test file, and here we are going to be importing first of all the describe, the it, and also the expect. And now underneath there we are going to be also importing our fetch data function. And now let's just use our describe. Okay, so I'm going to use the, and I'm going to give it the name of like fetch data, and let's just remove there. And inside there, let me just save this file, and inside there let's just create our test suite. So it should return the correct message after the promise is resolved, or the promise resolves. There we go. And let's just save our file. And now inside there, first of all, we are going to be calling our function, but the main thing is that we are now testing this asynchronous function. So which means like we also have to mark this function as asynchronous. So I'll use like async right here, async. And now let me just save my file. And now that we made our function as an asynchronous function, so which means like we can now use our await inside there. So I'm going to just use like await, and here let's just use our fetch data and execute this function, and I'm going to store the inside the result variable. And now here we are going to be using the expect and pass my result inside there, and we want that to be data fetched successfully. So you know, let me just copy this entire thing from here, and now let me just place there right here, save my file. And now let's just check this out. I'm gonna refresh there, and yep, everything is working the way we expect him to work. But imagine if I just remove this async function from there, and also this await, and now if I save my file, now our test will fail. And why is that? Because our code takes some time to run, and our test file does not. So that's why we have to provide this await and this async right here whenever we are testing a asynchronous function. So that was example number 1. Let me give you one more example. So I'm going to create a file with the name of fetch user data.js, and I'm going to also create a test file for this. So I'll use like fetch data.test or fetch user data.test.js file, and I'm gonna go into my fetch user data. What am I saying today? And here we are going to be just exporting this function and create that right here with the name of fetch user data, and it's going to be an asynchronous function. It's going to take the user ID, and based on that ID we are going to be fetching our data. So if our user ID is equal to invalid, so in this situation we are going to be returning promise.reject. There we go. And I'll just say like user not found or something like that, because if the user ID is not valid, so which means like we would not be able to find the user. So let's just return our promise.resolve. resolve, and here we have to pass our object, and we are going to be passing the id. Come on, the id is going to be set to user id, and also we are going to be passing a name, and name will be set to, I don't know, my own name like Hussein Web Dev. And now let me just save my file. Okay, so as soon as I save my file, now let's go into our fetch user data.test file, and here we have to import our describe function. We also have to import our it and also our expect, and now underneath there we have to import our fetch users data from our user data function or file, whatever you want to call it. And here let's just create our fetch user data, and inside there let's just use our it function. It should resolve with the user data when, come on, the user data when the user id is valid. Okay, so if I save my file, here you can see I just forgot that we have to provide that async right here, because we are now testing an asynchronous function, so we have to provide that async there. And now we can use our await and then fetch user data, and now we have to execute this. So I'll just pass like valid user id, and I'm going to also store the inside the variable like const result is going to be equals to this response. And here let's just pass our expectation, so I'll just provide my result. Come on, there we go. And to equal, there we go. And here we have to pass the id, and the id will be set to valid user id, which we are now passing there, and also Hussein Web Dev. And now let me just save my file. Yep, our test is now successfully passing. If I check this out, so this is the test that I'm looking for. Let me just expand there. Yep, our test is now successfully passing. And now let's create another test suite for this. So it should reject with user not found message, or user not found when the user id is invalid. Okay, so we are going to be using await, but first of all we have to use our async right here, and then we are going to be using await, and here we have to provide our expect and fetch user data. And now let's just provide like invalid id or something like that, and then we are going to be just rejecting this promise. So I'll use like rejects and then to be, and here let's just paste like user not found. And now if I save that, and here you can see our test is now successfully passing. Run that, and you know what, let me just expand there. So we have these two tests, which is it should resolve with the user data when the user id is valid, and on the other hand it should give us user not found when the user id is not valid or invalid. So yeah, this is how we are going to be testing our asynchronous code by using async and await. The Witcher 4 trailer just came out like an hour ago, and I have to say it was one of the most good looking game I have ever seen. So I'm dying to play that game as soon as possible, but let's just hope that they release it very soon. Anyway, so now that we completed the unit testing part of this course, so now let's get into the React testing. So I'm gonna open my terminal, and now let's make a setup for there. So let me just make that a bit bigger so you guys can see everything a bit clear. Just like that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be using npm create and then read at latest, and I'm going to give it the name of like my React testing or something like that. I'm going to choose React.js with TypeScript because we are going to be using a TSX. Now let me go into that folder, and I'm going to install all of the dependencies inside there. So then successfully done. So I'm going to open that in my VS Code, and this is how it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the public folder. I'm going to go to the assets folder and remove the app.css, and then I'm going to go into the app.tsx file, and I'll just write my RAFCE inside there. Let's just close there. And now we have to install a lot of dependencies for our testing. So the first thing that we have to do is that we have to install our test runner and assertion library, in which is the vtest. So I'm going to be using npm I and then -d and vtest. So it's going to install that in my project, and this is our test runner and our assertion library. So now that's successfully installed. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to install the React testing library for testing our components. So I'm going to just use like npm I and then -d add testing library /react. So it's going to install React.js in my machine, and also we would need the JS DOM. So now let's just use npm I and then -d JS DOM. So I know a lot of you will ask me, Hussein, what is a JS DOM? We've been testing our code and we are seeing the result of our code inside our terminal, but now we are going to be testing our components, so we would need some sort of a DOM. Okay, so this JS DOM will allow us to work with a virtual DOM. So that's why we are now installing this. So now let me just install that, and you will see that in a few seconds. By the way, you don't have to worry about that. So that's totally done. Now we have to install something called the custom matchers, which is called the JS DOM. Okay, so I'm going to use like npm I and then -d not forward, add testing, and then dash library / just, come on, just, and then DOM. So it will allows us to test our code just like a custom method, like to be in the document and so on and so forth, something which you don't know already, but you will see that in a few seconds. So this library will just gives us a custom methods. You just have to keep that in mind. And finally, we also have to provide a types for that. So I'm going to use like npm I and then -d, add types and install a types for that JS. So let's just install that. And this is the library which I'm about to install. You don't need that, but sometime you will get an error inside your VS Code. So I also want you to install there. So I'm going to use like npm I and then add testing, come on, testing library and then just DOM. Okay, just DOM. So install there. So now our installation is now successfully done. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to go ahead and go to our package.json and provide our UI. Okay, so our script. So I'm going to provide a comma here and I'm going to say like test and then UI. You can give it any name that you prefer. And now I'm going to just write like retest and then -- UI. So now let's just save there and I'm going to also close there. Next, we have to provide a configuration for our vtest. So inside our root, not inside the src folder, but inside this root, I'm going to right click on there and create a new file with the name of vtest.config, come on, config.ts, because inside this file we are going to be providing our custom configuration for our vtest. So I'll first of all import something called the define config. Come on, let's just import the define config from where, from our vtest, and then let's just go to the config file. So I'm gonna save my file right now. We will also export this so we can use it in other files. So I'll use like export default and I'm gonna say like define config, and here we have to provide our object, and inside this object we have to provide our test object. Inside that object, first of all, we have to specify the environment. Currently we are now testing our code inside this terminal or node.js environment, so we don't want that. We want to test our component inside the JS DOM. So we will have to specify our environment and we have to set there to their JS DOM library which we just installed a few seconds ago. Next, we have to also set the globals, and don't worry about the globals. So I'll just write like globals and set that to true, and I'm going to also provide the set of files, and that's going to be set to test and then setup.ts file. Now that we know what this environment is, now let's talk about this global. So whenever we are testing our component, whenever we are testing our function, so we usually import the describe function, we also import the it function, and we also import the expect function. But now that we set this global, so we no longer have to import all of that stuff like in all of our component. So we are going to be testing a lot of component, and inside those component we are going to be using the describe, it, and expect, but we don't have to import that. So that's why we are now providing this global and we are now setting that to true. And finally, we are just providing this set of file because this is going to be for our custom matches. So now let's just save our file. I'm going to go into my root, and here inside there we are going to be creating a folder with the name of test. And by the way, you can either give it the name of like double underscore and then test and then double underscore like dunder. But in my case, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just write like test and hit enter right here. So first of all, we have to create our component. Then we are going to be testing our component. So I'm going to right click on there and create a folder with the name of components. And inside there, we are going to be creating our hello world.tsx file. Okay, so let's just use our RAFC inside there, save my file. And this is how our component looks like. But now let's just go ahead and create a file for there. So here inside this test file, first of all, we are going to be creating our setup file. Then we are going to be testing our component. So I'll just use like setup.ts. And here I want you to notice this should be test, by the way. I made a mistake. So this should be test with s, and inside this test folder we have our setup.ts file. Okay, so here I want you to notice that we are now providing the tests, which is a folder which we just created right here, and then inside this folder we have our setup.test file, as you can see right here. And now here inside this setup.ts file we are going to be passing something called the custom methods. So I'll just import first of all the testing library. Come on, let's just use our testing library, and we are going to be importing there from the JS and then DOM. Okay, so it's going to allow us to use our custom measures. So that's everything that you have to do for now. And now I'm going to just provide a bit of basic test right here. So you know what, first of all, we have to create our components folder. If you want to create this components folder, you can, but if you don't want to use the components folder, you can write your test inside this setup file. But in my case, I prefer the components folder, so I'll just give it the name of like components, and inside there let's just create our hello world test.tsx file right here. Okay, so now inside this file, let's just test this component which we just created right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to my hello world file, and here we are not going to be importing the describe function and also the add function and also that expect function because we already declared that inside our vtest config file. So what do we have to do inside this file? The first thing that we have to do is that we have to import something called the render function. So let's just import the render and also the screen, and you don't have to worry about them because I'm going to explain that in a few seconds right now. Okay, so I'll just import that from the testing library, not from the DOM but from the React.js. So now let me just save there. So what in the world is this render and what in the world is this screen? This render will allows us to render our component to the virtual DOM, and this screen will allows us to select a certain element to test that specific component. If you don't get it, you don't have to worry about that, but the next thing that we have to do is that we have to import our component so that we can test that. So I'll just import like hello world. As you can see, it will not help us to auto import our components. So how can we solve that? I'm gonna cut that from here, and you just have to grab this folder and you have to put that inside this src folder just for a second, and then you have to grab it back, and now it will start working. I promise it will start working. Just check it out. So here you can see, I guess they provided some configuration. I'm not quite sure about that, but now let me just save there. And now if I just use import hello, and as you can see right here, it will allows us to auto import our component. So now if I click on there, so it's going to import our component from this file. So I want you to hold control and click on there, so it's going to bring you to this file, and this is our component. I'm gonna save this file right now, and the next thing that we have to do is that we have to use our describe, and inside there I'll say like hello world component or something like that. And now inside this describe we are going to be implementing our add, and it should render a hello world, maybe component would be fine. And now let me just save that. Okay, so now the first thing that we have to do is that we have to render our component, then we would be able to interact with our component. We are not just testing our functions, now we are testing our JSX, and we have to render that to our virtual DOM. So if you want to render that to our virtual DOM, so for that we are going to be using this render method or function from this testing library and React.js. Okay, so we will just use that render, and inside there, as you can see right here, it requires the UI and the React node. So now in this case, I'm gonna just pass my hello world component, and now I'm gonna close there. So now it's gonna render my component to the virtual DOM. So the next thing that we have to do is that we have to provide our expect and also our screen. So I'll just use like expect right here, and now I'm going to be using their screen. And as I said, that this screen will allows us to interact with a certain element inside our component, then we would be able to test that specific functionality or behavior. Okay, so I'll just use like screen, and then this screen has a lot of matches. So it has find all by alt, and there are a lot of things, and I promise you're gonna learn a lot of them by the end of this course. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna just use like get by text, and now let me just hit enter, not id but just like get by text, and now let me just execute there, and we are going to be testing or fetching or getting our element by using that specific text. So what am I talking about? So you know what, let me just copy this entire text, and now let me just place that right here. So essentially we are telling that first of all we want you to render our component, then we only want to get that specific element which has this content like hello world, and we want there to be, so let me just use like to be in the document. Come on, in the document, there we go. And now let me just save my file, and this is something called the matches which we already set up inside the setup.ts file right here. Okay, so let's suppose if I just comment this line out, save my file, as you can see right here, it's going to give us an error. So now let me just uncomment there, save my file, and now that error is now gone. If you don't get this coding, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, like, it's not that much difficult code to be honest, but the only thing which is difficult is this line of code, and I guess 90% of this testing course is based on this screen, because we are going to be learning about how we can fetch our element by using area, by using get role, and so on and so forth. And this screen is one of the difficult part of this entire testing, and you guys already know all of their stuff. Like, first of all, you have to import all of your render and screen from your testing library, then you have to import your component, then you have to use the describe and describe your test suite, and inside there you just have to use over it to define your test. And then we are going to be rendering our component to the virtual DOM, and here is the hardest part which we are going to be covering in this course. Today is a weird day. The Witcher 4 trailer just came out, and also, guess what? The Devon just came out. I just watched the Fireship video about the Devon. Like, the first look of the Devon, it requires like, I don't know, maybe $500 per month or something like that, and it was hilarious. Everybody was telling me like, Hussein is gonna take our jobs and this and that. Anyways, I am getting sidetracked. So now we are going to be learning about how we can test a component with a prop. So a component which takes a prop, how can we test this? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define another component with the name of user status dot tsx, and inside there I'll just use my arrayfce, and I'm going to just remove that from here. And it's going to take a few props. So it's going to take the email, and it's going to only take one prop, which will be an email. So I'll just write like email. I'm going to also annotate that right here, like email will be a string. Now let me just save my file, and here we're going to be just rendering our email. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just write like, if we have the email, so in that situation we're going to be just rendering like welcome, welcome, and their specific person email. But if that's not the case, like if the user did not provide their email, so then we are going to be just using like sign up. Now let me just save my file, and this is how our component looks like. And now let's get into the test and test this component. So I'll just create a file with the name of user status dot test dot tsx, and inside this file we are going to be doing all of that stuff once again. So like, first of all, we are going to be importing all the necessary, and then it should be packages, and then we have to describe our test suite. And after that, you know what, my spelling is horrible, but let me just copy and paste there. So first of all, we have to import all the necessary packages, then we have to describe all the test suite, then we have to write the test, then we have to render our component to the virtual DOM for testing, then select the element from the DOM for the testing, and finally we have to specify our assert. So now let me just remove there, and the first thing that we have to do is that we have to import the render and also the screen from our React testing library. So I'll just use like add testing library from the React. Now underneath that we have to import our user status from our components folder. Now I'm going to be using a describe, and here I'll just write like user status component or something like that. Okay, so I'll just change there to component. There we go. And now inside there we are going to be using our it, and it should display a welcome message when an email is provided. Okay, so how in the world we are going to be doing that? Well, first of all, we have to render our component to our virtual DOM. So I'll just provide my user status, and here we are going to be passing our email because it was required, and I'll just provide like, I don't know, maybe john@gmail.com or something like that. Now underneath there, first of all, we have to select this area where we are going to be rendering our content. So how in the world we are going to be doing that? Well, we are going to be using some kind of matcher. So I'm going to use that screen once again. And by the way, we are going to be learning a lot about this screen, but not right now. And if I just use a dot, here you can see we have a lot of methods, but I only want to select that specific element by their text. So I'll just use like get by text. Okay, so if I just use that, come on, it should be a text. There we go. And here we can specify our regular expression, or we can also write our text right here. But I'm going to just provide my regex like we are only searching for the welcome, and we only want to select that. And if I just write the I, which means like select that specific element which have the content of welcome, and it doesn't matter if that is lowercase or uppercase. Okay, and I'm going to store that in some sort of a variable. So I'll give it the name of like welcome message or something like that. This can be equals to this method, and now we have to provide our expectation. So let's just use our welcome message, and I'm going to be using the dot to be in the document. Now let me just execute there. Okay, and finally we have to run our code so we can see that. So I'll use like npm run test UI and hit enter. And yeah, we also have to install this, so I'll just use y to install that. That's totally done. So I'm going to use npm run test UI once again, and it's going to open that right here. So here you can see all of our tests are now successfully passing. Like as you can see, this component test is passing, which is like hello world, and inside there we are just providing these two tests, and we also have our user component, and this test is also passing. So you know what, let me just go ahead and remove there. So if I just remove there, as you can see, our test will now fail. So this is how we are going to be testing our component with the prop. And now let me just provide there once again. We can also provide another test suite for there. So I'm going to hide there, and now underneath there we're going to be using our it once again. So it should display the sign up button when no emails is provided. Okay, so now let me just render my component once again, and I'm going to pass my user status and close there. Now let me just save my file. And why are we, oh, we are now getting this error. That's because we are not providing anything. So I'll just write like email, and I'm not going to pass anything to there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to select my sign up button, which you can see right here. Now you want to select this button. So how can you go about doing that? Like, how can we select this button? Well, we can still use that same method from our testing library, which is this get by text. So I'm going to use that for now, but later we are going to be learning about a lot of them. So I'll use like screen once again, and I'm going to just use like dot get by text, and here we can just pass, it should be text, and here we can just pass our regular expression like sign up, and I'm going to also provide the I for the lower and upper cases. So I'll just use like sign up button, and I'm going to store my content inside there. Now let me provide my expectations. So I'll just use like sign up button, and we want it to be in the document. So now we have to execute that. This is save our file, and now let me just refresh there. And as you can see, both of our tests are now successfully passing. So like display, come on, display a welcome message when an email is provided, and display a sign up button when the email is provided. When the email is not provided, so it should be button. Okay, so it is correct. So like when no email is provided, as you can see right here, both of the tests are now successfully passing. But now if I specify something inside there and save my file, and here you can see one of our tests is now failing. And why is that? Because it is not looking for our email, and now we are providing that email, so our test will fail. So this is how we are going to be testing our component with the props. So we just have to create our component, and then we have to call our component right here, or pass our component, and we can specify our props right here. And then based on those props, we can test our component. So now let's talk about how we are going to be testing those components, which will iterate over through some content, and then it will render there, which means like a list content component. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to close all of them, and I'm going to go into my component folder, and inside there I'm going to define my programming languages list.tsx component, and I'll use my RAFC inside there, and it's going to take a languages as a prop. So I'll provide like languages, languages, there we go. And I'm going to also annotate this component like languages, languages, and I'm going to specify string of array. So now let's just save there. I'm going to go back so you guys can see everything a bit better, and now let's just remove this label. And first of all, we are going to be checking if the languages which we are now taking as a parameter dot length is equal to 0. So in that situation, we are going to be returning this UI. So I'll just say like div, and inside this div I'm gonna just render a paragraph which will say like no programming languages, come on, languages, languages found. And now let me just save there. But if that's not the case, like if we have some languages, so in that situation we have to render our UL, and then inside this UL we have to iterate over through all of our languages. So I'll use like languages.map and provide my language right here, and also the index, and it should be just a singular language, not a languages. Okay, so now inside there, come on, let me just close that. What the hell am I doing today? I can't even type today. So let's just write our li, and inside this li we are going to be rendering our language, and I'm going to also pass my key, and the key will be set to index. So now let's just save them, and this is how it looks like right here. So if we don't have any languages, then we are going to be showing this message to our user. But if we have some languages, then we are going to be showing this message, or showing those languages to be precise. So now let's just close there. I'm going to go ahead and go to my test components, and inside there we are going to be creating our file with the name of programming list.test.tsx. Okay, so now inside there, the first thing that we have to do is that we have to render, we have to import the render and also the screen from where? From our testing library React.js. And now underneath there we also have to import our programming languages list. Okay, it is super long. And also we have to use our describe, and now I'll just give it the name of like programming languages list component. There we go. I'm gonna use like it should render a list of programming languages. There we go. So now inside there, let's just create our array so that we can iterate over through there. So I'll just create a few programming languages like JavaScript, the king, and Python. Yeah, yeah, cool. Then we have a Ruby. Yeah, Ruby. And then we have Java. Java. And then we have the guard, which is a Golang. And then I'm gonna just use like const languages, and I'm gonna store them inside this variable. So now let me just save them, and now we are going to be passing them to our virtual DOM. So first of all, we have to render our component to our virtual DOM. So I'll use like programming languages and render my component like so. And here is gonna take a languages as a parameter, and we are going to be passing that languages as a prop right here. There we go. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to iterate over through this list, and then we are going to be providing our expectations. So I'll just use like languages dot for each, and here let's just provide our language right here, and inside there let's just close there. Come on, what the hell am I doing today? And inside there we have to provide our expectations. So I'll just provide like screen and then dot. But here is the question: how in the world we are going to be selecting like each language? Let me just go ahead and go to my component right here. Like, how in the world we are going to be selecting this li? Well, it is simple. When you know the solution, so yeah, it is simple. But if you don't know the solution, so it is not. So I'll use like get by text, and here we just have to copy this language and we have to place it right here. So it's gonna select that specific language, and then we are going to be providing like to be in the document. Now let me just execute this, save my file, go there, and now let me just refresh there. And here you can see our test is now successfully passing, which is this programming languages. So now let me just expand there and also expand this one. So yeah, our test is now successfully passing. If I just remove that from here and save my file, and here you can see we are now getting this error right here because our test is now failing. So this is how we are going to be testing a component with the props. So I'm going to also collapse them. And now let me just provide a languages empty array. So I'll just use like it should, should render a message when list is empty. So in that situation, what do we have to do? We have to first of all render our programming languages component. And here I'm going to execute that, and I'm going to provide my languages, but totally empty languages, nothing inside there. So I'm gonna just provide my expectation right here. So I'm gonna say like expect, and it should get the screen dot get by text, not role but text. And then we have to provide like no programming. And why am I providing there? That's because when we don't have any languages, so in that situation, which means like we are going to be getting this error message. So that's why we are now getting this paragraph with this message like no programming languages found. So I'm going to only select this portion like no programming, but if you want to select that by in this entire message, you can totally do that. So I'll just provide like no programming, that's it, and I want that to be in the document. And now let me just execute that and save my file and check this out. And here you can see all of our tests are now successfully passing, and this is our final test. If you want to broke that, so I'll just provide like a save my file, and here you can see our test is now failing. So yeah, this is how we are going to be testing a component which takes a list of items, or list component. Now let's talk about the king, the heart of React testing component, which is called get by role. So what it is and why should you even care about that? So get by role is a query method used to find DOM elements by their area role. So what is that area or area role? That simply means accessible rich internet application. So area roles explain what an element does or its purpose, especially for accessibility. This method is a part of a set of tools used to test how accessible and interactive your application is. It helps to understand how users with the screen readers or other assistive technologies would use your app. So that was just a quick definition of get by role. But now let's talk about how in the world we are going to be using that. Well, this is a method. So first of all, we are going to be using a screen, and then we are going to be using the dot get by role, and then we can specify the role and also the option. But now let's talk about what is a role. It is a string representation of area role for which we are looking for. Like for example, if you want to select the button, we are going to be providing a button. If you want to select the link or text box or heading and so on and so forth, which I'm about to show you in a few seconds. But we are going to be first of all providing our role as a string. And then we have an optional option object which can include some additional configuration if we totally can, but we don't have to. So yeah, that was get by role. So how that's gonna work, suppose we have this component, and inside this component we have our div, and inside that div we have our button which will say like click me. So how we are going to be selecting there, first of all we are going to be writing our test, and then we will render our component to the virtual DOM. If you want to select this, so we are going to be using a screen and then dot get by role, and here we can specify our area or area label, and then we can provide like additional options if you wanted to, and finally we can just provide our expectation, and this is how we are going to be testing there. So like, why get by role? Like there are a lot of other methods which you can choose from, so why is this get by role so special? First of all, it provides accessibility. It encourages developer to think about the accessibility of their component. That's the first thing. Secondly, it allows us to provide a reliability, like queries based on area role are less likely to break when the internal structure of their component changes. Finally, it allows us to use best practices. It helps align tests with how user interact with your application, like screen readers, keyboard navigation, and clicking, and so on and so forth. So that was just a quick definition of get by role. So now let's get into the coding, and then you will get to know what I'm talking about. So now let's talk about get by role, and we are going to be learning about area labels in a lot of great detail. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and go to my components folder, and now I'm going to create another file with the name of finding elements by role or something like that. Roles, I guess role would be find.tsx, and now inside there I'll just use my RAFC inside there, and let's just remove that from here. And first of all, I'm going to be creating first of all the element, and I'm going to also mention the accessibility role or the area role or area role, whatever you want to call that. So first of all, we want to select the anchor tag. So to select the area role for that, so I'll just use like let me just provide a link, because the area role for there is a link, and I'm going to provide an anchor tag, and we're not going to be going to anywhere. So the accessibility role it has is a link. And now let me just save my file. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and go to my components folder and define my finding elements by role test.tsx file right here. And first of all, we have to import our render and also our screen from the React testing library, like so, from the React. There we go. And we will also import our finding elements by role, and now let's just save there. Here let's just provide our describe, and we will just describe there like finding or find elements or finding elements. And I'm going to provide my first test case, which will be it should query the link element. So how are we going to be doing that? Well, we just have to render our component which will be finding elements by role. And now let me just execute there, and now we are going to be providing our expectation, and let's just use our screen. And now if I just use dot, here you can see we have a lot of methods. So one of the best method which we are going to be using is get by role. Okay, so now let me just execute there, and as you can see right here, it takes a role, and it also takes the optional options object right here. Okay, so if you want to select there, we already know that we are going to be selecting this anchor tag, and this anchor tag has the area label of link. So now let's just provide a link right here, and that's it. And finally, we want that to be in the document. And now let me just execute my file, and let's just refresh there. You know what, I'm gonna have to delete those other components, or maybe I'm going to leave them. So we are only interested in this one component, like finding elements by role. Let me just expand there. Yep, our test is now successfully passing. Let me just zoom in a bit, and yeah, that's working the way we expect him to work. So this is how we are going to be finding a specific DOM element by their area label. Okay, so that's done. Now let's talk about how are we going to be selecting a button. So I'll just write a button with the label of button, and we already know that if you want to select there, so the area label for there will be button. So now let me just save my file, and I'm going to just duplicate my test once again, and here let's just change there. It should query the button element, and if I just write a button right here, so it will not complain. So now let me just save my file, and here you can see the button is now successfully retrieved, so which means like everything is working the way we expect them to work. Suppose if you want to get the footer, so let's just use a footer, and I'm going to provide a label which will be a content info. Unfortunately, this is the area label for there, so we are going to be using a content info. So now let me just save my file, and I'm going to duplicate there once again. Let's just duplicate there and provide my inner and select the footer. So I'll use like footer, and here we have to specify our content info. and it should be a lowercase content info like so. So now if I save my file, it's gonna also select and everything is working the way we expect them to work. So that's totally done. Suppose if you want to select like h1, so I'll just write like this h1, and the area or area label for there will be a heading. Okay, so I'll just provide like heading right here. So now let's just save our file, and I'm going to duplicate there once again, and I'm going to change that to h1, and here we're going to be selecting there by the area label of heading. So now let's just provide this, save our file, and here you can see where component is rendering and selecting our h1. So which means like everything is working. Let's suppose if you want to select the header, so I'll just use like header, and I'm going to provide my banner, and let's just provide a banner right here. So banner, save our file, and I'm gonna go a bit fast because I know the rest of them is just a theory. It should query the header element, and it is a banner. So now let me just provide this, save my file, and here you can see it is now selecting there. Let me go ahead and create an image. So I'll use like image, and I'm gonna also provide some sort of alternative text to there. So let's just remove there, and it should be a description. description. Provide the area label for there will be image, and now let's just select there. I'm going to duplicate there once again. I know I'm repeating myself and my code again and again. That's because I want to show you those area labels. I know you are a lazy person. You don't want to do that by yourself. So now you're watching this video, so you will learn this. So now let me just save my file. And here you can see it's going to also select our image right here. Suppose if you want to select an input field with the type of number, so the accessibility or area label for there will be spin button. Okay, so now let me just save my file. Now let me duplicate this line of code, and here let's just provide our number element or number input, and it should be a spin button. So now let's just save there, and here you can see it is now selecting there successfully. And let's suppose if you want to select like the UL, which will be a list item, and here let's just provide our list item, save my file, and I'm gonna just duplicate this line of code and change that to the UL. So it should query the UL element, and I'm gonna provide my list item right here. List item, let's just save our file, and my test is failing. That's because it is not a list item, it is just a list. Let me just save there, and here you can see our test is now successfully passing. And now let me show you the final one, and I promise that's gonna be the final one. Okay, so let's just use our li. Suppose if you want to select the li, so then it is a list item. This is going to be just a list, so I'm going to make it as a list, and these are a list item. So I'll use like a list item, and now let me just save my file, and I'm going to paste like a list. Come on, I'm going to duplicate there first of all, and now let me provide my li, and li will be just a list item. And now let me just save my file, test this out. So yeah, it will also select that li. So this is how we are going to be selecting the elements by using the get by role and also the area label. In the beginning of this course, I mentioned that we are going to be spending a lot of our time on the screen object and its properties. So now let's talk about it. So what are we talking about? We are now talking about the by placeholder text, by display value, by label text, by alt text, by test ID, by role, by titties, by title, by text. So we are going to be learning about all of them, but now let's just break them down one by one. Now I know a lot of you will say like, Hussein, there's a lot of methods, but don't worry, I have a formula which will help you master all of them. So what is that formula? Well, first of all, we are going to be categorizing all of their methods in 3 categories. So the first category we have is a get by, then we have a find by, and then we have a query by. So whenever you see those methods with get, that simply means that the purpose of them will be when the element must be found in the DOM, and the behavior will be it will throw an error if the element is not found, and the use case will be when you are sure that the element will be present during their test. So this is how we are going to be using all of them with get. Now let's talk about how we can use them with query. So whenever we see that method with query, so that simply means that the purpose of them will be when the element may or may not be found, and the behavior will be it will return null if the element is not found, and it will not give us error, like no error whatsoever. So it's gonna give us null. And the use case will be when you need to check for the non-existing of an element, or it is okay if the element isn't there. Okay, so this is how we are going to be using those methods with query. And now let's talk about the final one, which is called the find. So the purpose will be we use them for asynchronous element, those elements that will appear after some delay, like after some time. So we usually use find with some asynchronous code. And then we have the behavior, so it will just return a promise that results when the element is found, or reject after the default timeout, which can be also configured, by the way. And the use case will be when you are testing something that will appear asynchronously, like for example API call or user interaction or database call or something like that. So then we can use all of them with all. So like we have get all by, then we have a find all by, and then we have a query all by. So we can use all of them for handling multiple elements of the same time. And the behavior will be this query return array or list of elements, and the use case will be when you expect multiple elements and want to interact with all of them. So that was it about the get by, find by, query by, and get all by, find all by, and query all by. So let me just show you all of them in diagram. So the first one we have is a get by, and the use case for that is like when you expect the element to be in the DOM and it returns single element and it throws an error if the element is not found. Then we have a query by, and the use case for that will be when the element may or may not be exist in the DOM, and it will return a single element or no, and it will not throw us an error. Okay, so if the element is not found, so it's going to give us null but not error. Then we have a find by, so when the element is asynchronous, like it will appear later, it will take some time, so it will return promise like single element, and yeah, it will throw us an error if the element is not found. Then we have a get all by, when you expect multiple elements, like for example array of elements, and it will throw an error if the element is not found. And then we have a query all by, and it is exactly the same like as the previous one. So when multiple element may or may not exist, and it will return array of element or empty array, and it will not give us an error, like it will not throw us an error. Then we have a find all by, so when multiple element appear asynchronously, so it will return promise array of element, and if the element is not there yet, so it's gonna give us an error. So that was all of them. So now let's get into the coding and you will master all of them. Okay, so now let's start from the first one, which is a get by. So I'm gonna go ahead and create my component with the name of get by queries.tsx. And first of all, we are going to be writing our code, and then we will get into that testing part. So let me just remove that label, and I'm gonna just write my h1, and I will say like my component. There we go. And now underneath there, we are going to be creating a button which will say like submit, and I'm gonna also specify the area label like so, and that's gonna be set to submit. Now underneath there we have to create our button, and it's gonna say like cancel, maybe CANCEL. There we go. And we're going to be passing the ID, and ID will be set to cancel button. And now underneath there we have to create our input field, and this input field will have the type of text, and we're going to be also passing a placeholder which will say like enter the text. And now let's just also provide our anchor tag, and here we can just paste like some, I don't know, maybe HTTPS, and then maybe example.com would be fine. Just write like example or test.com or something like that. I'm going to also provide the target, and the target will be set to blank. And I'm going to provide the rel, and rel will be set to this thing which I can't pronounce, so that's why I didn't even bother. Okay, so let me just provide a label like visit VISIT example. Now underneath there, let's just create our div, and I'm gonna paste like custom element, and here I'm gonna also paste the data test ID, and it's gonna be set to. And now let me just save my file and go back. So this is all the stuff that you have to write, and I want you to also provide these attributes as well, because now we are going to be selecting all of them inside our test file. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and go to my components, and let's just create our get by queries.test.tsx right here. And the first thing that we have to do is that we have to render, import our render, and also our screen from where? From our testing library React.js. And we also have to import our get by queries from that component folder, and we also have to provide our describe our code, which will be get by queries. And inside there, I'm going to provide my it, and it should render the component with the correct. So let's just start from the heading, which is this h1 right here. So how in the world we are going to be using that? Well, first of all, we have to render our component, then we will think about this. So I'll use like get by queries. Now underneath there, we're going to be using that screen, and here if I hit dot, as you can see right here, we have millions of them. Not millions, but we have a lot of them. So I'm going to be using like get by text, and now let's just provide like my component. There we go. And I'm gonna also store that inside the heading variable. And now let me provide my expectation. So expect, and let's just provide my heading to be in the document, there we go. And now I'm gonna save my file. And now if I save my file, and here you can see we are now getting this check result right here, like everything is successfully passing. So yeah, that's looking cool. And this is how we are going to be selecting our H1 by using get by text. So that's done. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to create another test suite. So I'll use like it should find an input with placeholder text. So I'll just select like this placeholder text, which is this input field right here. So how are we going to be selecting there? I'll use my render method, and let's just provide our get by queries and close there. And now underneath there we are going to be using our screen, and let's just use get by placeholder. And here you can see we're now going to be passing this placeholder text right here, like enter the text. So I'm gonna copy there, and now let me just, come on, what the hell am I doing? Let me just provide there right here, and I'm gonna store that inside the variable, and I'm gonna give it the name of like input field, and it's gonna be equals to this function execution. And now let me provide my expectation. We want there to be in the document. And now let's just execute this, save my file, and here you can see everything is passing as we expect them to pass. Now let's just hide there, and I'm going to also provide another test suite. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just write like it should find an anchor tag with specific href. Now we are selecting this anchor tag right here with this specific href. Is that I'm going to be using that screen once again, but first of all we have to render or component, so which is by queries, and I'm going to just render that right here. Then we have to use our screen and then get by role and provide my link inside there. And here we also have to provide our options, and option will be name, and we want to select for this specific name like visit example. Come on, what was there? Visit example. So I'm going to copy the name of that and place it right here and close there. And we already discussed about this get by role, and mostly you're going to be using this one, but in the majority of time maybe you will use that other one. So you know what, I'm going to store the inside the link variable. So I'll use like link, and it's going to be equals to this function execution, and provide my expectation. And here we have to pass our link and to have attributes, and let's just provide our href and provide my https. And you know, let me just copy this attribute from here. So I'm going to copy there, and let's just paste it right here. And now let me just save there. And now my test is successfully passing because it has their specific attribute done. I'm going to also close there. And now underneath there, what do we have to do? We have to create two more test suites. So I'll just create my it, and it should find a div using data test ID, which we already defined right here. Now we are going to be selecting there. So if you want to select them, first of all we have to render our component, which is a get by queries. And now let's just close there, god damn it. And now underneath there, let's just use our screen dot get by test ID. And now here we are going to be passing our custom element right here. Okay, so let's just use our custom element. It's going to be equals to this function execution or that method. So I'll just provide like expect in custom element to be in the document. And now let me just execute there. And here you can see my test is now passing. But now if I go ahead and let's just say like if I just remove the save my file, and my test will fail. And now let me just provide there once again, and it is passing. So now let me just hide there once again. And finally we have to provide yet another test case. So I'll just use like it should, come on, should find an element by its role. And here let's, come on, it should be a role, and render or get by queries. And here we are going to be using our screen get by role, and provide my role, which will be a button. Now we are going to be passing a name, and name will be set to submit. So we only want to get that specific button. So I'll use like button and save my file. As you can see right here, so we have two buttons, and we only want to select like this button, not their second one. Okay, so for them we are going to be using that expect and provide my button inside there and to be in the document. Now let me just save my file, and here you can see everything is passing the way we expect him to pass. And that was our get by queries. Next we are going to be learning about get by all queries. So now let's talk about get all by queries. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a file with the name of get all by queries.tsx. And now inside there, we are going to be creating our component first of all. So now let's just do that. I'm going to go there, and inside there, first of all, we are going to be creating our label, and I'm going to give it the label of input 1. Now I'll just say like label for input 1. And now underneath there, we are going to be creating our input field with the type of basically nothing. And also I'm going to provide a placeholder to there, and placeholder will say like enter text here. And I'm going to also provide the ID, and ID will be set to input 1. And I'm going to also provide the value, and the value will be set to default value. I'm going to also make it disabled, so it will look something like this. Now let me just copy and place there right here, just like that. And now we are going to be changing this label, so I'll just change that to like input 2, and also label for the input 2, another ANOTHER, another placeholder like so, and another value, and let's just also make that as input 2. Now underneath there, we are going to be defining two input fields, so I'll just write like input with the type of basically nothing, and we are going to be providing a placeholder, and placeholder will say like enter something. Come on, something, oh my god, something dot dot dot. I'm gonna also duplicate that, and it should be like something else, or yeah, that's gonna be fine. And I'm gonna also create a paragraph which will say like this is a paragraph with some text content dot. So now let's just duplicate there, and I guess that's going to be fine. I'm going to also create an input field once again so that we can select them for our testing. So I'll use the input field, and now let's just remove there. I'm going to also provide the value, and the value will select some display value, and I'm going to duplicate there and change it to another display. Come on, display value. Now underneath there, let's just create our images. And we're not going to be passing any images, but I'll just provide like image1.png. We don't even have those images, but we're now providing so that we can provide our test based on this. So I'll use like a simple image or something like that, and I'm going to also duplicate that and change that to like another simple image, and this should be the image 2 right here. So now underneath there, we're going to be creating a div which will say like div, come on, div content with title attributes, and I'm going to also provide a title, so like whenever you hover over this, is going to show you this message like this is a div with title attribute. And I'm going to also duplicate that and change that to another div with title attribute, and the content will be another div with a content, or another div content. There we go. So now that's totally done. I'm going to also provide one for the button, so I'll just provide a button which will say like disable button 1, and I'm going to provide the role, and the role will be set to button. And here let's just provide our area label. Come on, area label, and that's going to be set to this is a button. Now let me just duplicate that, and I'm going to also change that to the button 2, and this should be button like so. And I'm going to also change those labels so that it will look a bit better. Now underneath there, let's just create our div which will have the label of this div has test ID of 1 dot, and this test will have the ID of 2. I'm going to also provide the data test ID right here so that we can select a forward test. So it's going to be set to like custom test ID 1 or something like that. And you know what, let me just copy that from here, and now let me just place that right here. I'm typing a bit fast, so now let's just change that to like custom test ID 2, and now let me just save my file, and that's going to be it for our JSX. Now let me go ahead and go to my test components, and here we are going to be creating our get all by queries dot test dot not JSX but TSX. Now let's just create our test. So the first thing that I want to do is that I want to import my render, and I'm going to also import the screen from our testing library React.js. That's going to be fine. And we would also need to get our get all by queries from our component, and now let's just provide our describe. So not declare but describe. There we go. And here I'll just say like get all by queries, and it should, first of all, let's just provide there for the first one, so it should render multiple that can be queried by various various methods. So it should be various. There we go, various. Now inside there, we are going to be providing all of our test logics. I don't want to create those ifs and also that render again and again. I don't want to waste your time, so we are going to be doing that right here. But you don't have to do that in real world projects, as I show you that in the beginning of this course. So like you don't have to do that. I want to save some time, so that's why I'm doing it this way. So I'll use like get all by query, and I'm gonna just close that right here, save our file. And now underneath there, let's just first of all select our input labels, as you can see right here. So we are going to be selecting this input and also this labels so that we can test there. So the first thing that I want to do is that I want to use the screen and then get all by label text. So now let me just provide that right here, and here we are going to be passing our regular expressions. So I'll select label for input, come on, input, and here let's just provide our I, which means like if this is either uppercase or lowercase, we don't care about that. We want you to just search for this element and gives us all of them. So where in the world is that even available? So now let me just copy that, and now let me just place it right here. So as you can see, it's going to give us this input, and it's going to also gives us this second input right here. So I'm going to store that inside the variable. So I'll just give it the name of like inputs by label x, and it's going to be equal to this function execution. And now here we can provide our expectation like inputs that variable, and then here we can get the length to be 2. And now underneath there, let's just iterate over through all of our input fields. Like here you can see we have more than one, so which means like we are going to be iterating over through there. So I'll use like inputs, you know what, inputs by label text, and let's just use our for each right here, and we're going to be passing our input right here. And now inside there, let's just provide our expectation. So I'm going to pass my input field to be in the document, and now I'm going to execute that. I'm going to also duplicate that once again, and here we want that to be disabled. So now let's just save our file. So now let me just save my file, and now I'm going to run my code. So I'm going to use like npm run test UI. So it's going to run my, as you can see, all of our tests are now successfully passing, and we are now getting every single thing totally passed. Now we are going to be selecting these input fields with these placeholder. So how can you go about doing that? Once again, I am not using this it again and again because I want to save some time, and you should be doing that. So you know what, let's just first of all use our screen, and we have a get all by placeholder text. So it's going to give us the collection of them. So we would use like enter something, and I'm going to also pass this I or our regex. And now here let's just store the inside the variable with the name of inputs, come on, inputs by place, there we go. And now it's going to be equals to this function, and I'm going to also provide my expectation right here. So that inputs, you know, let's just copy them. I'm going to copy there right here, and now let me just place there, and here we also need the length, and we want that to be 2. Now let me paste that right here once again. Now let's just iterate over through there because we know it's going to give us a collection. So here let's just provide our expectation. So we want the input to be in the document. So let's just use to be in the document, and now I'm going to also duplicate that and change that to be disabled. And now let me save my file, and our test is failing. Okay, received element is not disabled. Let's just check this out. So yeah, it isn't disabled. So now let me just make that disabled. I'm going to copy that and place it right here. And now let's just check this out, and here you can see our test is now successfully passing. That's cool. Now let's go ahead and just select this paragraph, and now let's just go there and select these paragraphs. So I'm going to be using like screen and then get all by text. And now let me just hit enter right here, and we want to access there by this text. So like this is a, and let me just copy that from here. I'm going to only copy this portion, so let's just copy that. If you want to copy the entire portion, you totally can, but in my case I'm not going to. So I'll just store the inside the variable with the name of paragraphs by text, and it's going to be equals to this text, right? I mean like this method. And now here we have to provide our expectation. So paragraph by text, and we want to get the length of the, and we want that to be only 2. And now underneath that, let's just iterate over through there. So I'll use like for each, and for each paragraph, what do we have to do? We have to provide our expectation, and let's just provide our paragraph inside there, and we want there to be in the document. So now let's just save our file, and once again all of our tests are now successfully passing. Now that we successfully selected this paragraph, the next thing that we have to do is that we have to select these input fields. So I'm gonna go ahead and just select them. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna pass like screen, then dot, come on, screen dot get all by displayed value. Okay, so let's just provide like some, what was that? It was some display value, I guess. So it shouldn't be some display value. Oh, you know, let me just select this one. We don't care about this one. So I'm gonna just select there. I'll use like some display value and provide my I there. Now let's just store the inside the variable with the name of inputs by display value, and it's going to be equals to this function. Now underneath there, we are going to be providing our expectation, and let's just provide our input, and yeah, that's same thing. Okay, provide our length, and we want there to be only 1 because we only want to select this first one. We don't want to select this second one. Okay, so we only want to get there 1. And now let's just provide our expectation. So let's just provide like inputs and their display variable, and we only want to get the first one, and we want there to be in the document, and we also want there to be disabled. So let's just provide our disable right here, and I'm gonna also make the disable. So let's just use like disable, save our file, save this file, and all of our tests are now successfully passing. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to select these images right here. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna go there, and now underneath there I'm gonna use the screen and then get all by alt text. So I'll use like alt text because we want to get there by this alternative text. So that's why I'm using like get all by alt text right here, and I'm gonna just paste like another sample image or something like that, and it should be sample. There we go. And I'm gonna also store the inside the variable with the name of images by another alt text, and it's gonna be equals to there. Now here we have to provide our expectation, and I'm going to be using that same expectation, and we want to get the length to be only 1. And now let's just also provide another expectation. Here we have to use our variable once again, and we are only interested in the first one, and we want that to be in the document. Test this out. Let's just refresh. All of our tests are now successfully passing, so that's totally done. So the next thing that we have to do is that we have to select these buttons right here by either with their role or by this area label. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to select that by these roles right here. Like both of these button have these role right here, role with the, yeah, just a role with the button. I'll just write like screen.get all by roles. We already saw there, and here we have to provide our button, and we're going to be also providing an optional option array which will be set to name, and we want to get there by this is a button, and we don't care if the text is uppercase or lowercase. So now let me just store the inside the variable. So I'll just use like buttons by role, or role would be fine. And now based on that we are going to be passing our expectations. So button by role, and we want to get the length of there, and we want there to be 2. And now let's just iterate over through there. So I'll use like buttons by row, and for each row we want to pass our button. So for each button let's just provide our expectation of button, and we want there to be in the document, and we also want there to be disabled. Okay, so are we making it disable or not? So let me just make it disable. So I'll just provide a disable right here. Come on, disable. There we go. I'm gonna copy there, and now let me just place it right here. Save my file, save this file, and here you can see we are now getting some error like unable to find the accessible element with the role of button. I have to check this out, so I'll just cut that from here. We have to put that inside. There we go. So let's just put that right here, save our file, and now our test is successfully passing. Finally, we have to select these div by using these data test ID. So how I can do that, I'll just use like screen by get all by test ID, and we want to get them also. I'm going to be using like custom test ID, and here we are now providing this data, I mean like this one, like custom test ID 1 and custom test ID 2. So I'm going to select both of them, and now let me just store there like divs by test ID, and it's going to be equals to this function. I'm going to also provide my expectation, and let's just provide our divs by test ID, and we want to get the length, and we want there to be 2. And here let's just iterate over through this. So I'll use like divs, come on, let me just copy there. What the hell, I am bad at spelling. So let's just use our for each and provide my div inside there, and provide my expectation for the div, and we want there to be in the document. And I'm going to also execute this, save my file, and here you can see all of our tests are now successfully passing. So now that we learn that how we are going to be getting something by get all by label text, get all by placeholder text, get all by text, and get all by display value, get all by alt text, and get all by test ID. So yeah, that was it about the get all. Next we're going to be covering the query by. So now let's talk about the query by. So I'm going to just create a file with the name of query by queries.tsx, and here we're going to be creating our component first of all. And now inside there we have to create a div, and inside this div I'll just say like alert message or something like that, and we are going to be also providing a role of alert, and I'm going to also provide the area live, and that's going to be set to assertive like this. And now underneath there we are going to be creating a button which will say like click me, and now let's just save our file. And now we are going to be creating our label, so I'll use like label, and it will say like input 1, and here we have to pass our label 1, and I'm going to also pass my input field, and we're not going to be providing any type today, but we are going to be providing our ID. It's going to say like input 1, provide our placeholder which will say like search, and now underneath there here let's just provide our label once again. It's going to say like input 2 in this case, and label, and I'm going to provide my input here, remove this type of text, and provide our ID, input 2. So I'll just use like input 2, and placeholder will be set to email. There we go. And now underneath there, let's just create our h1, which will have the content of header text, and I'm gonna also provide a paragraph which will say like this is some paragraph text or something like that. Finally, we have to create our div which will say like custom element element, and we are going to be providing our data test id, which will be our custom id. So I'll use like custom element element, and now we are going to be creating our input field with the type of, not even a type, let's just remove there. I'm gonna provide the value. It's gonna say like pre-filled text or something like that. Now let me just save my file, and these are all of our content. So now let me just close there, and now let's just create our test file for there. So I'll use like query by queries.test.tsx, and the first thing that we have to do is that we have to import our render and also our screen from our testing library React.js, and also we have to get our query by queries, and now underneath that provide our describe method, and I'll select test query by, and let's just remove there, but it shouldn't be just query by, but I'm gonna also provide the methods like plural. And here inside this field we have to first of all select this alert message. Let me just get my component. So let's just get there. We're going to be selecting this div, and then we're going to be also selecting that button. So let's just render our component first of all. So I'm going to be using like query by, and then our component like so. Now let me get that screen. So I'll use like screen and then query by row, and here we can just provide our alert, and now we are going to be storing there in the alert variable like so. I'm going to also select the button, so we are going to be using screen.query by row, and provide my button inside there, which will have the roll off button. So now we have to just provide our expectation, and I'm going to provide the alert to be in the document. We don't want to do anything crazy, and we also want the button to be in the document. So I'll use like button and save my file. And once I do that, here you can see we are now getting this result right here. But should, oh we are just providing a should. So should query by role would be fine. Now this is looking better. So let me just refresh there. That's looking better. Now we are going to be selecting these labels right here. So I'll just use like it once again, and I'm gonna say like it should query by label text, and inside there we have to render our component, which will be our query by queries. And now let's just first of all select our first label, which is this one, and then we are going to be also selecting this label as well. So now let's just save our file, and I'm going to be using screen by query by label text, and I'm going to be passing my label 1 and store that inside the label 1 like so. And let me just duplicate that and change that to like label 2, and change this one to label 2 as well, and provide my expectation of label 1, and we want that to be in the document. Execute that, and we also want the label 2 to be in the document too. I'm gonna save my file right now, and let's just refresh that, and this is how it looks like right here. Okay, so everything is passing the way we expect them to pass. So I'm going to hide them for a few seconds. Now that we want to select this header and also this paragraph, so this is how we are going to be doing then. Let me just make that in lowercase. I'm going to create another test suite, and it's going to say like it should query by text, and render my component right here query by queries, and let's just use our screen by query by text, not test id but query by test. And here I'm going to just pass like header text, which we are providing right here. I'll store that inside the variable with the name of header, and I'm gonna also get that paragraph as well. So now let me just also get this. So I'll use like screen query by text, not text id but just a text. There we go. And this is some paragraph text, and I'm gonna also provide my paragraph. Come on, paragraph is gonna be equals to this function execution. I'm gonna provide my expectation, and we want to pass that header right here, and we want that to be in the document, and we also want that paragraph to be in the document as well. So now let's just save our file, and now we are getting an error. Let's just check this out. Okay, let me just get there. You provide a value prop with a field of on change. This is not something that I'm looking for. Let me just change there to my regex, so it will start working. So now let me just change that to regex. Still it is not working. Let me just check this out. If I click on there, okay, so we are now getting query by query hard text, I mean header text. Oh my god, header text. And now it should be passing. Now let me just copy there and place that right here. And yeah, everything is now working the way we expect them to work. I even changed this one. Like, I shouldn't have to, but I thought it may be a problem right here. So now let me just change that back. And yeah, okay, so we are getting an error. What the hell? So we have to change the to this regex. So now let me just save my file and refresh there. And now everything is passing successfully. Now that we selected that, the next thing that we have to do is that we have to select this div by using this data test ID. So I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna also hide there. And here let's just provide our test ID. So I'll use like it should query by test ID. And I'm gonna pass like render. And here let's just pass our query by queries. Close them. I'm gonna first of all use screen by query by test ID and provide my custom element. And now let me store the inside the variable with the name of custom element. It's gonna be equals to there. And now we have to use our expectation custom element to be in the document. Come on, to be in the document. And now let me just execute this, save my file. It is passing. Next, we have to select this input field with the type of value. With value. So I'll just use like it should query by display value and render our component first of all like this. And let's just get our element by using query by display value. DISPLAY display value rather. What the hell? Query by display value. This one, put this display value inside this. So I'll just copy that from here. I'm gonna copy that and place it right here and store that inside the input and provide my expectation of input. And we want that to be in the document. And now let's just save our file. And here you can see all of our tests are now successfully passing and we are not getting any errors. So yeah, this is how we are going to be selecting our elements by using the query by. Okay, so now that we learn about query by role, we also learn about query by label text. We also learn about what do we call it, query by text, and also query by test ID and query by display value. Now let's talk about the query all by query. So I'm going to create a file with the name of query all by queries.tsx, and now inside there I'm going to be pasting a lot of JSX, and you can find all of their JSX in my GitHub repository. So now let me just go back. First of all, we have two buttons, then we have two divs with the role of alert, and we also have two sections with the role of region. Then we have our label, then we have an input field label once again, and we have an input field for the third time. Then we have input fields with the placeholder of search and also the email. We have our headers, we have the paragraph, we have a div with the custom data test ID, and finally we have three more input fields. So you know what, let me just test this out. I'm gonna close them and I'm gonna create my component with the name of query. Come on, query all by queries.test.tsx. And the first thing that I want to do is that I want to import the render and also the screen from our testing library React.js. And I'm gonna also import the query all by queries from our component, and I'm gonna also provide my describe and test query all by methods would be fine. And I'm going to provide my it should query all by row. First of all, we are going to be querying our element by role. So I'll use like query all by queries, and underneath there we have to first of all get this button. So now let me go ahead and go to my component. So we are going to be getting these buttons. So I'm not going to be going through like each and every single one of them. I'll just write a code. So I'll use like screen get all by role, and here we have to pass our button, and I'm going to store that inside the variable with the name of button. Now let me select that alert. So I'm going to be using screen and then query all by row, and here ROLE. And okay, so we have a query all by row. Why it's not working? Let me just pass alert. Okay, now it's working. So here we also have to store that inside the alerts variable, and this is how it looks like. So now we have to get the region, and it's going to be equals to the screen dot query all by row, and here we have to pass our region region inside there. I'm going to provide my expectation right here. So we want it to be, first of all, let's just pass our buttons, and we want it to have the length of 2, and I'm going to also duplicate that like 3 times, and we want the alert to have the length of 2, and we also want the region to have the, come on, region, we also want the regions to have the length of 2. And you know what, first of all, let me just get that alerts and place it right here, save my file, and here you can see our test is now successfully passing. And why is that? Because we have 2 buttons, 2 alerts, and 2 regions inside our JSX. So here you can see we have 2 buttons two alerts, and we also have two regions. So that's why our test is now successfully passing. So now let me just hide there. Now let me create another test suite. So I'll just go ahead and use my it. Come on. It should query all by placeholder text in this case. And I'm gonna first of all render my query all by queries and close them. Now that we have to select these input fields with the type of, like the placeholder of search. Okay, so it's gonna give us these three, like the first one and this last one is gonna just skip this one. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna use like screen, then query all by placeholder text and pass my search inside there. And I'm gonna store the inside the variable with the name of search. Input sense can be equals to there. And I'm gonna also use the screen dot query. Come on. Query all by placeholder text and paste my email inside there. And now let me just store there inside the email inputs, and it's going to be equals to there. Okay, so I'm going to also paste the expectation and provide my search element or search inputs rather, and we want that to have the length of 3, because as you can see right here, so we have this input field, like this is 1, 2, and this one is 3. So this test gonna pass, and I'm gonna also provide the expect and email inputs, and here we want that to have the length of, come on, to have length of only 1. Okay, so we are now selecting this one email one. So now this test is going to pass, and as you can see right here, this test is now successfully passing. And I'm gonna also hide them. Now that we have to select these H1s and also these paragraphs. So now let me just go ahead and select them. But first of all, we have to create our test. It should query all by text. So I'll use like first of all the render query by queries, and then we have to use the screen and query all by text text, and provide my, let's just use our regex. So header text and select the. I'm gonna also store that inside the headers variable. And now underneath there, we have to use the screen query alt or query all by text once again, not test ID, but just a text once again. And we have to use our regex like paragraph text, and here let's just use them right here. And now we are going to be selecting them by using our paragraph. And now let's just save. And I'm gonna also provide our expect for that. So we want the headers to have the length of 2. Now let me just duplicate that, and we have to change that to paragraph, and we want that to have the length of 2. Now let me just save my file, and yep, our test is now successfully passing. I'm gonna close that. Now we have to select these divs which have these custom data ID right here, or test IDs to be precise. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna just render my or use my it. So it should query all by test ID and provide my render inside there. So query by query, and I'm gonna also close there. And now underneath there, we are going to be using our screen query all by text ID and provide my custom element inside there. So I'll use like custom elements, and it's going to be equals to there. Okay, so we are now getting an error. Query all by text ID, test ID. There we go. Now let me just provide my expectation. So I'll use like custom element, and we want that to have the length of 2. And now let me just save my file, and this test should pass because now that we have only 2 divs which will have the custom test IDs. And now finally, let's just select these input fields. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just hide there for a few seconds, and we have to write our test. So I'll just use like it should query all by display value and provide my render inside there. So query all by queries and close there. Now that we have to use our screen query all by display value and provide my text inside there. So let me just copy that from here. I'm gonna copy there, place it right here, and we also have to, I guess that's gonna be fine. And I'm gonna store the inside the variable with the name of input or input values, values. If I can spell that today, god damn it, input values. There we go. And now let me just duplicate there, and we have input values 2, and also change there to 2. Okay, so I'll just provide my expectation input values, and we want that to have the length of 2 and duplicate that. And we want the second one to have the length of only 1, because we only have the text 2 one time and we have the text 1 2 time right here. So that's why our test should pass. So as you can see right here, now that we learn about get all by row, we learn about the query all by row, we learn about the query all by placeholder, we learn about the query all by text, query all by test ID and query all by display value. Okay, dokie. So now let's talk about the find by query. So I'm going to create a file with the name of findbyqueries.tsx. And inside there, let me just place all of that content, and now let's just save our file. First of all, we have our h1, then we have our paragraph, then the button with the area label or area label, then we have our input field, image, input field, data, div with the data test ID, and then we have our label with HTML4, and finally we have our input field right here, so which is looking cool. I'm gonna go ahead and provide a test cases for that, and by the way, you can find all of that coding in my GitHub repository. So I'll use like findbyqueries.test.tsx, and now let's just hit enter. The first thing that we would need is our render method and also our screen from our testing library DOM. And now underneath there we have to get our find by queries, and now let me just copy them, and the next thing that we have to do is that we have to provide our describe, and I'm going to just provide like find by queries component, and inside there let's just use our it, and it should, or you know what, in this case I'm going to just use a test rather. What the hell, I've been using that it again and again. Now let me just try out the test. So it, I mean like not it but test finds an element by its text content. Okay, so now inside there I'm gonna render my component like find by queries and close there like so. Let me just save my file, and the first thing that we have to do is that we have to select this h1. So how in the world we are going to be selecting there? Well, to select there, we already learned about a lot of ways, but now we are going to be covering the find by text, so which also means there is going to be an asynchronous operation, so which also means that we have to mark our function as async function, because now it's going to take some time. So now we are going to be using await and screen and then find by text, and inside there let's just use our find by what was that, find by queries test. So you know what, let me just copy this entire thing and place it right here and provide my regex inside there, and I'm going to store them inside the heading element, and it's going to be equals to that function execution. Now let me use my expect and provide my heading element, and we want that to be in the document. Let's just save our file, and here you can see our test is now successfully passing, which means like everything is working the way we expect them to work. Next we have to select this area label. So how in the world we are going to be doing that? Well, that's quite simple and easy. Okay, so we are going to be using their test once again. So we are not going to be using that from the gist. God damn it. So let's just use that it, and I'm going to just rename that to test, because I know a lot of people will ask me, Hussein, why aren't you using test instead of that it? So now I'm using that. So finds an element by its area, and I'm going to also mark that as async, because this is a async component. So here we have to provide our find by queries function or component, and now underneath them we have to first of all use the await, then we can use the screen, and then find by label text, and here we are going to be passing this label text right here. So click me, I'm going to copy there, and let's just provide there, and we want that to be either lowercase or uppercase. Let's just get our button element, and it's going to be equals to this function execution, provide my expectation, and we want to just pass our button element like so, and we want that to be in the document. I'm going to save this file right now, and here you can see our test is now successfully passing. Now let me just hide there. Next we are going to be selecting this input field. So how in the world we are going to be doing there? I'll just use that it, and now let me just rename that to like test, and I'm going to say like finds an element by its placeholder text, and I'm going to also mark that as async so that we can see there. So now let's just use our render and find by queries, and I'm going to close there like this. Now underneath there we are going to be using the await and screen find by placeholder. Come on, find by placeholder text. There we go. Now we are going to be placing that same text, so I'll just copy there. Now let me just place it right here and provide my I. Now we are going to be using like input element, and it's going to be equals to this value. Now let's just provide our expectation, and we have to pass our input element, and we want that to be in the document. And now let's just save our file, and our test is now successfully passing because it should be. I'm gonna also hide them. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to select this image by using this alt or alternative text. So let's just use our test case once again. Yep, this is working, so I'll just change that to an element on element by its alt text, and hit tab, remove them. And first of all we are going to be rendering our find by queries. Close this, save my file, hit tab, and now underneath them we have to use the await and screen find. Come on, find by alt text, like so, and here we have to just paste that alternative text. So I'm gonna just copy there, which is just a test image, and we have to place it right here. And now I'm gonna be using like image element. It's gonna be equals to that value, and we also have to mark that as async because this is an asynchronous component. So now we are going to be using our expect image element, and now we have to use to be in the document. Save our file, everything is passing, and this is what we expect. That's done. Next we have to select there by using this display value. So I'm gonna go ahead, let's just undo there. So I'm gonna go ahead and provide my other test case. So I'll use like test, and here just pass my test case. So test finds an element by its default value, and I'm gonna change them. And first of all, we also have to mark the as async so that we can provide our asynchronous operation inside there. I'm gonna use the render and provide my find by queries and execute this component right here, save this file, and now we are going to be using await and then screen find by display. Come on, display, oh my god, find by display value. There we go. Now inside there we are going to be pasting that same display value. So let me just copy this entire thing and place it right here and provide my I there. Now let's just use our input elements and store them inside this variable. And now we are going to be pressing our expectation like input element, and we want that to be in the document. And now let's just save our file, and our test is now successfully passing. This is something that we expected. Now we are going to be selecting this div by using this test ID. So how in the world we are going to be doing there? This is exactly how we are going to be doing there. So I'll just use that test once again and choose the second one. And now let me just remove that and find an element. Come on, element by its data test ID. And now inside there, what do we have to do? We have to render our component first of all. So like find by queries and save this file. And now underneath there we have to use our await, but first of all, god damn it, we have to use this async syntax right here, and then we are going to be using like screen, come on, screen find by test ID. And now let's just paste that same test ID inside there. I'm gonna copy that from here, place there, and provide my I there. For our regex, now let's just use our test element. It's gonna be equals to that same element. And now let me provide that expect test element and use that to be in the document. Yep, our test is now successfully passing, and this is what we expected. And now the final thing that we have to do is that we have to select this label. So now we are going to be selecting this label right here by using this HTML4. So now let me just hide there from there. Now we are going to be passing our test and choose there. I'm going to use like finds an element by its HTML4 in this case, because we are going to be selecting our element as our HTML4. Remove there and paste our async inside there. And now inside this component, first of all we have to render our find by queries and execute there right here. And now we are going to be using await and then screen find by label text. And here let's just paste our label text, which is this label text. So I'm gonna copy there right here, place there, and provide my I there. Now I'm gonna be using like label element. It's gonna be equals to there. And now let's just provide our expectation, and inside this expect provide our label element, and we want it to be in the document and save our file. And yeah, that was our entire test case. Find by label text, find by placeholder text, find by alt text, and find by display value, find by test ID, and finally we just learned about the find by label text right here. So yeah, that was it about the find by, and this is an asynchronous operation. You know what, I just changed my mind, like whether you like it or not, but I'm gonna still cover there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna just create a component with the name of find all by queries, queries.tsx. I'm gonna copy and place all of that content right here. So first of all we have our h1, then we have 3 paragraphs, then we have 3 buttons with area labels, then we have 3 placeholders, then we have 3 images, 3 input field with default value, and then we have a 3 div with the data test ID. So now let's just provide our test cases for that. Now I'm gonna do something special. Okay, so we are going to be creating a component with the name of find all by queries dot test. Come on, test dot ID. What the hell am I doing today? .tsx, there we go. The first thing that we have to do is that we have to import our render and also our screen from our component, which is a testing library /react, and now we have to import the find all by queries. And yeah, that's there. We have to provide our describe right here, so I'm going to be using their describe. I'm going to select find all by queries component, there we go. And here I'm going to be using something called the setup and tear down. So this is a concept which we are going to be covering later, but now we have to use this hook, which is a before each. Okay, so we want to run this function before each test case. So this is just exactly what I mean. So we are going to be just passing this function, and here we are going to be just passing our render and find by all queries, which we just created this component, and we want this function to run every single time our test case run. Okay, so this is why we are now passing like run before each test case. So now let's just save our file. And by the way, we are going to be learning about the setup and tear down a bit later, or maybe not. I guess we are going to be learning about that. I'm not quite sure about that, but you know, let's just pass our test cases. So I'm going to use like finds all the elements by text. So now we are going to be using like await and screen. Let's just use our find. Come on, find. Oh my god, find all by text. And here we have to pass our item right here, which we are providing. So let me just go ahead and select them. So I'm going to just use like item 1. I'm going to copy them, but we cannot pass a 1 right here just like that. Instead, we have to first of all write this backslash and then D and then /. And now we have to also mark them as our asynchronous component or async function. Now let's just store them inside the paragraph. It's going to be equals to them. And I'm going to use like expect case, pass my paragraph inside there to have the length of only 3. So now let's just save our file, and our test is now successfully passing. Now let me just expand there, and yeah, it is totally working. And why is that? That's because it's going to select for each of the paragraph, and it's going to just select them. So now it's going to give us like more than one element, which means like 3 elements. Now we have to iterate over through there. So I'll use like for each pass our paragraph like so, and for each paragraph, what do we have to do? Or you know, let me just change there with S. So I'll just select all of these 3 and provide my S inside them. And I'm gonna select expect, provide my paragraph, and we want that to be in the document. And now let's just save our file. Still, all of our tests are now successfully passing. And now let me just hide them. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to find out all of their buttons, and then we can test this. So let's just use that. I'm gonna use that 8 finds all the elements by row. So now we are going to be selecting those buttons by row, and I'm going to also mark my component or function or test suite, whatever you want to call there, by using the async syntax. So I'll use like await and screen find, come on, find all by row. And here we just have to pass our button inside there, and let's just store that inside the buttons variable. Let me just provide my expectation, and that buttons we want there to have the length of 3, and also it's going to give us that length. So we just have to use like buttons dot for each element. We want to just pass our button, and for each button in this case, what do we have to do? We have to provide our expect, and for this expect we are going to be passing our button, and we want that to be in the document. And now let's just save our file, and here you can see all of our tests are now successfully passing, and this is something that we want. Now that we selected the buttons, the next thing that we have to do is that we have to select these inputs with these placeholders. So let me just hide there and provide another test case. So I'll use like 8 finds all the elements by placeholder text and mark that as asynchronous component. So async, and here inside there I'm going to be using await screen find all by placeholder text, and I'm going to just paste their text inside there. So I'm going to copy there, place them, and we want to store them inside the inputs right here. Now underneath there we are going to be using the expect, provide my inputs inside there, and we want that to have the length of only 3. And now underneath there we are going to be iterating over through there once again. So I'll use like for each and pass my input inside there, and provide my expect input to be in the document and execute them. Let me just save my file and refresh there, and still all of our tests are now successfully passing, and which is something that we want. And now we are going to be selecting these images by using these alt text. So how in the world we are going to be doing that? Let me just show you how we can do that. So we've done that like 1000 times in this course. So it should find all the elements by alt text in this case, and I'm gonna also mark the as async. Inside there, let's just use our await and screen find all by alt text right here and provide my test IDs, which is this test image. So now let me just place them, and we are going to be using the images, and now underneath they provide our expectation of images to have the length, and we want there to be 3 of them. And we are going to be also iterating over through all of their images by using these for each. Let me just paste the images. So I'll just use like expect the image to be in the document and execute my function. But okay, here we have to pass our arrow right there. Let's just save our file, and our tests are now successfully passing. Next, we have to find out all of their elements by using these default value. So I'll just go ahead and hide there for a second. And now we have to create our it. So it should finds all the elements by display value and mark it as our async function. I'm going to be using await and screen find all by display value and paste my test value inside there, which is a input test 1 and so on and so forth. So let's just, god damn it, I can't even copy it. So let's just copy them and place it right here, and we want it to be like this. So instead of providing this one, we want to select like all of them. So I'll just use like inputs, and this is provide there right here. And now let me provide my expectation, provide my inputs inside there. Inputs PUTS, it should be inputs like so, and it should have the length of only 3. Provide our inputs dot for each input. We have to provide our input inside there, provide our expectation of input, and we want that to be in the document save our file, and our test is now successfully passing. And the final thing that we have to do is that we have to select these div which will have this data test ID. So let's just do that. And that's going to be the final thing about these query methods. So let me just go ahead and provide the it should find all the elements by test ID, and I'm going to just first of all use the await, but first of all we have to mark the as async. And now we are going to be using a screen find all by test ID, and here we have to paste their test IDs inside there. So let's just copy there, and now let me just place it right here, and I'm going to be using const test element, and it's going to be equals to there. Now underneath there we are going to be using what expect provide my test element, and we want that to have the length of only 3. And now let's just use our test element dot for each element. What do we have to do? We just want to provide this expectation like for each element we want that to be in the document save our file. And finally all of our tests are now successfully passing, and there was a lot of query methods that we covered in this section. So what do we learn? Okay, we learned about the find all by text, we learned about the find all by row, and then we learn about the find all by placeholder text, find all by alt text, find all by display value, and find all by test ID. Okay, that was a lot of stuff. Now let's talk about how we are going to be testing the user interaction, like whenever the user types something or the user clicks on something and so on and so forth. So let's just test this. So the first thing that I want to do is that I want to create a component with the name of, not here but here, I want to create a component with the name of toggle message.tsx, and now inside there we're going to be just creating a simple toggler. So I'll just import first of all the use state, and now underneath there we have to create our component with the name of toggle message. And now let me just initialize my state. So I'll just use like use state, and I'm going to provide the false initial value inside there, and I'm going to also destructure the is visible and set is visible. It's going to be equals to this use state. Now here let me just remove that from there, and I'm going to be just creating a button which will allows us to toggle our message. So I'll use like toggle message, and here let's just render that message. So if this is visible, let me just write like if this is visible. So in this situation we want to show this paragraph which will say like this is a, or this message is visible or something like that. And now I'm going to also attach the event handler on there, like when somebody clicks on this button. So we want to fire this function which is a toggle message. And now let me just copy the name of that and create this function right here. So I'll use like const toggle message, and here we are going to be just using the set is toggle or set is visible, and we want to provide our previous state and not previous state. Okay, so now let me just save my file, and this is how our component looks like. So now let's just go ahead and test it. I'm going to create a file with the name of toggle message.test.tsx. But first of all, whenever we are testing the user interaction, we have to install another library. So now let me just stop there, and here, let me just delete that from here. And here now we are going to be installing the user event. So I'll use like npm I and then dash d as a dev dependency, and I'm going to use like testing dash library user event. And now let me just hit enter, so it's going to install that right here. And now let me use my npm run test UI, so it's going to run my test runner inside the test UI. So yeah, now let's just import all of our stuff. So I'm going to be importing the render and also the screen from our testing library React.js. And we would also need to import the user event from where? From the testing library. And now in this case, we are going to be importing them from the user event, okay, because we want to listen to the user events. And now let's just import also our toggle message component so that we can work with the, I'm going to use the describe right here, and also like toggle message component. And here inside there, I'm going to use like it should toggle the message visibility when button is clicked, CLICKED. And we would also make the as async right here. And now, first of all, we have to render our component, which is a toggle message component, and I'm going to save that right here. The first thing that we have to do is that we have to get that button, then we would be able to click on that button. So I'll just use like screen.getByRole, and I'm going to provide the button, and which button we want to select. We want to select this button right here. So I'm going to just copy this message, and I'm going to also provide the options, and here let's just paste our message, and I'm going to provide that as a regex, and it shouldn't be I. And now let me just store that inside the button variable, and this is how it looks like. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to make sure that initially our message will not be shown inside the UI. So I'll just use like expect, and then let's just use our screen.query by text, and here let's just pass the message visible. What was that? I'm gonna copy that, or this message is visible. I'm gonna just place it right here as a regex, and I want that to be no. So like initially we want this to be hidden, and now here we are going to be testing the user interaction. So I'm going to just grab my user event from this library which we already imported right here, and now here inside there we have a lot of methods. So if I just hit dot, here you can see we have a clear, click, copy, cut, and so on and so forth, like all of the user interactions. So I'm going to just choose like click. So like whenever the user clicks on this button, first of all, we are now selecting this button from the DOM. Then we are telling it that initially we want this message to be hidden, and now we are providing like whenever we click on this button. So in that situation, what do we have to do? Let me just write like a wait right here, because there's going to be an asynchronous operation. Then we want this message to be shown. So I'll just use like expect, and here let's just pass our screen and then get by text, and I'm going to just paste this text inside there. So I'm going to copy that from here, this entire thing, and now let me just place that right here, and I'm going to provide my I there, and we want that to be in the document, and I'm going to execute that. And after that, whenever we click on there once again, so I'll use like user event, and whenever we click on there once again, so in that situation we want to hide there. Okay, so I'm going to just copy this entire thing, and now let me just place it right here, and that was it. So now let me just save my file, and now let me explain there. First of all, we are going to be selecting this button from the DOM, and then initially we want this message, as you can see right here, we want that to be hidden, and when somebody clicks on that button, this button, so we want this message to be visible, and whenever they click on there once again, so we want this message to be hidden. Okay, so you know what, let me just run my test cases, and as you can see right here, all of our tests are now successfully passing right here, which means like everything is working the way we expect him to work. So that was example number 1. Now let me give you yet another example. So I'm going to create a file with the name of to-do list.tsx, and inside there basically we are going to be just creating a simple to-do list. So I'll use my RAFC inside there, and the first thing I want to do is that I want to just create my to-dos and set to-dos, and it's going to be equals to the use state, and the initial value I'm going to just put empty string inside there. And I'm going to also create an interface for my type. So I'll use like interface to do, and inside there let's just provide our text, and that's going to be set to string, and the completed flag will be also set to boolean. Okay, so now let's just copy there, and I'm going to also annotate my component with these to do. Okay, just like that. And let's just provide our empty array inside there, and I'm going to also get the new to do and set new to do, It's going to be equals to the use state. So let's just use the use state, and the initial variable will be set to empty string. Now let me go ahead and go to my UI, and I'll just use like to do app or something like that. And I'll also provide my input field with the type of text, and also I'm going to paste my value. So let's just paste that value inside there, and I'm going to say like new to do. And when somebody clicks on there, so then we want to fire this function which we are going to be creating in a few seconds. So let's just provide there, and I'm going to also provide the placeholder which will say like enter new to do like that. And now let's just save our file. Now underneath there, we are going to be able to create the to do by just clicking on this button. So I'll just use like add to do, and here let's just pass our on click event handler, and when somebody clicks on there, so we just want to fire this function, so which is a handle add to do. Now underneath there, we are going to be rendering our to-dos. So I'll use like UL, and inside this UL we are going to be using a to-dos.map, and here let's just pass our to-do and also our index inside there. And now let me just pass my li, and for each li I'll provide my key, and the key will be set to index. And you know what, I'm gonna also provide a bit of, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not. So let's just provide our input field inside there, and the type will be set to checkbox in this case. And we're going to be also providing a checked, and here it's going to be set to do dot completed on change. And here let's just pass our arrow function which will say handle toggle to do, handle toggle to do, and here let's just pass our index inside there. And by the way, we are going to be creating all of that functions in a few seconds. Okay, so now underneath this input we have to render our to do dot text so that we can see there, and finally our button which will allows us to delete their to do. Okay, so I'm going to pass like on click event handler, and let's just pass our function which will be handle delete to do, and pass our index inside there. Now let me just go ahead and just create these functions. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to just create or add a to do. So how in the world I can do that? I can just use like const handle add to do, and inside there I'll just use like if new to do dot trim. We just want to trim it out, and then set to do's. And here first of all we want to make a clone of our existing to do's if we have there. So I'll use like to do's, and then I'm going to use like text, and that's going to be set to my new to do, and also the completed flag will be set to false. Okay, and now underneath there I'm going to be using like set new to do, and I'm going to make the as totally empty. Now let me go ahead and just create this handle input change. So I'm going to create that right here. I'm going to create like handle input change, and it's going to take that event, and I'm going to also annotate the as change event from the React.js, and here we have to tell that we want to use the inside the HTML input element, and I'm going to also close it like so. And inside I'm going to use like set new to do and event.target.value like this. Now let's just create this function which is a handle toggle to do. I'm gonna go to the top, and I'm gonna create that right here. So I'll use like const handle toggle to do, and I'm gonna pass my index which will be set to a number, and inside there let's just first of all make a clone of our existing to-dos, and I'm gonna store that inside like const updated to-dos, and it's gonna be equals to this variable. And now I'm gonna use that updated to-dos and pass my index inside there, and now we are going to be getting that completed flag. And if that is not equals to that updated to do, and let's just pass our index inside there, the completed one. And now we have to use our set set to do's and provide our updated updated to do's. Now let me just save my file. And finally we just have to take care of this handle delete to do. So I'm going to create them maybe right here. I'll use like const handle delete to do. I'm gonna pass the index, and that's gonna be set to a number, and I'm gonna say like to do's dot filter and provide basically nothing, but we are only interested in the index. So I'll just use like if index is not equal to that specific index, and I'm gonna also store the inside the variable with the name of updated to do's. That's going to be set to their to-dos. I'm going to use the set to-dos and provide my updated to-dos right here. So it's going to push there to this set to-dos. There we go. And I guess we are totally done with the component. So, you know, let me just go ahead and go to the, not this one, to the app. And I'm going to render this component so that we can see there. So I'll use like to-do list, semi-file, and I'm going to use npm run dev. Let's just copy this link, and I'm going to place it right here. So yeah, we are now getting our to-do. If I write something, something, and click on this add to do, so it's gonna add there. I can also mark there as a complete, and I can also delete there. So yeah, these are my to-dos, and let's just test them. So I'm gonna stop there right here, and I'm gonna be using npm run test UI in this case. So it's gonna run my test runner, and as you can see we are now getting there. So let's just hit refresh. I already have those components, so maybe I'm gonna delete them, like toggle message, and I'm gonna also remove this toggle message component. Now I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna create my to-do list dot test dot tsx component right here. The first thing that we want to do is that we want to get the render, also the screen, and also from where, from our testing library React.js. Now underneath there we are going to be also getting the user event. Okay, so I guess, yeah, we already installed it, but it is not helping us to import this, so we are going to have to import them manually, and I'm going to import them from the user event. There we go. We would also need to get our to-do list, save our file, and now underneath there we have to describe our test suite. So I'll just give it a name like to-do list component or something like that, and here let's just provide our first test, like it should renders to-do list with an input and a button. Okay, so I'll just first of all render my component, which is a to-do list, and I'm gonna close there. Underneath there, we're going to be using our expectation, and here let's just provide our screen.get by placeholder text, and now inside there, I'm gonna just paste this placeholder text inside there. So I'm going to copy there, and now let me just place it right here, and that is our expectation, and we want it to be in the document. And we also want, let me just provide another expectation, screen.get by text, and we want to get that button, okay, which is this add to do. So I'm gonna copy there. Now let me just place it right here, and we want that to be in the document, save our file. So yep, our test is now successfully passing. So that's totally done. Now we are going to be creating another test for adding our to do. So I'll just use like it can add a to do item maybe. And I'm going to also mark the as async because now we are going to be interacting with our component. So I'll just use like render and to do list component. Now underneath there, the first thing that we have to do is that we have to get our input field, and then we can interact with the. So I'll use like screen.get by placeholder text, and here I'm going to just paste like that placeholder. I'm going to copy there and place that right here. And I'm going to store that inside the input right here, but it shouldn't be inputs, but it should be just input. Now you want to get that button, like whenever somebody clicks on this button, then we want to capture those interactions. So I'll use like screen.get by text, and now we are going to be getting the, not test ID, but just text. Now we are going to be getting there by this text. So I'm going to copy that and place that right here, and I'm going to use const button, and it's going to be equals to this button right here. So now the moment of truth, like whenever the user type inside this input field, what do you want to test? And also whenever the user click on this button, so what do you want to test in that situation? So I'll use like await and user event. Okay, so inside this user event we have our type. Okay, like whenever the user types something inside there, so we're going to be passing our input, which is going to be our place where we are going to be typing something. And I'll just type like new to do or something like that. And we would also need to click on this button right here. Okay, so I'll use like await and user event, and we have our click method right here, and now we are going to be passing this button. So like whenever we click on this button, so when we click on this button, what do you want to see? You want to see that new to do, which we are now providing inside this input field, to be rendered to the DOM. That's it. So I'll just use like expect, and here I'm going to be using like screen get by text, and let's just provide our new to do, which we are now providing right here, and we want that to be in the document. So I'll use like to be in the document, save my file. Now let's just refresh. Now we are failing. I don't know why, but we are failing. Let's just go ahead and enable to find the element with the alt text. It shouldn't be goddamn alt text. It should be just a get by text. There we go. Now let me just save my file. And now our test is now successfully passing. Now let me go ahead and hide there for a second. Now we are going to be able to make it so that we can mark our to do as completed. So I'll just create a new suite for that, and it can mark a to do as completed would be fine. And I'll just first of all render my to do list component right here. And now underneath there, first of all we have to get our input field and all of that kind of stuff. So you know what, I'm gonna just copy a few things from here. So we would need there, I'm gonna copy this entire thing from there. Now let me just place it right here, and I'm gonna also mark the as async. And now you want to get our checkbox. As you can see right here, we have this checkbox right here. So now we want to get there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just get that checkbox by using screen.get by row. Get by row. and I'm gonna just paste a checkbox inside there because we only have one checkbox inside our screen, and I'm gonna store that inside the checkbox variable like so. So what will be our expectation? So I'll just paste like expect. We want to paste that checkbox, but initially we want this checkbox to not be checked. Okay, so I'll just use like not and then to be checked. Now let me just execute that. If I save there right now, here you can see our test is now successfully passing. Like whenever we type something inside our input field and we click on that button, so it's gonna give us that checkbox, but that will not be checked initially. So that's totally done. But now whenever we click on that checkbox, so we want it to be completed or checked. So I'll use like screen dot, come on, what the hell? Screen dot get by text, and here not test but text, and here there's a space one new to do inside there, and const to do item is going to be equals to this new to do right here, and our expectation will be to do item dot to have the style. Okay, so I'm going to also pass a few style to it, so I'll use like text declaration is CORATION, and it's going to be set to line through. I'm going to save this file right now, and obviously our test will fail, and that's because we are not providing any style to our li or our checkbox. So now let me go ahead and just provide this text or this style to my checkbox. So I'll just select there, and here let me just paste this styling. So now we are providing a text declaration of if the to-do is completed. In that situation we want it to take a line through text, but if that's not the case, we want to just provide nothing. Okay, so now let me just refresh there. Here still we are now getting an error. Let me check this out. Oh, we are now getting this error. That's because we are not even checking the user interaction. God damn it. So we are gonna have to use the await, and now we can use the user event, and now let's just provide the click. Like whenever we click on there, so we want to paste our checkbox, and now let's just provide our expectation. So I'll use like expect the checkbox to be checked in this case. So now let me just execute there, and it should be just expect. There we go. Save our file, and now here you can see all of our tests are now successfully passing. So that's totally done. We also want to make it so that we can delete something. So I'll just provide my 8, and it can delete a to-do item. I'm gonna mark it as async, and now let me go ahead and just copy a few things from there. So I guess that's gonna be fine. Oh, you know what? I'm not gonna do that. I'll just copy this line of code. Now let me just place that right here. And first of all, you want to get our placeholder. So I'll use like screen by get by placeholder text. And now let me just provide like enter new to do and store that inside the input right here. So const input is going to be equals to them. And now let me get my button. So like whenever we click on there, so I'll use like screen dot get by text, and here let's space or add to do inside there. So whenever we click on that button, so I'll use like user event dot type, and here let's space for input field and new to do, and then we are going to be clicking on that button. So I'll use like user event dot click event, and now let's space for button inside there, and now we are going to be getting that delete button which we have right here. So we have this delete button, and now let's just get there. So I'll use like screen by get by text and provide my delete inside there, and now I'm going to be getting there. So I'll use like delete button is going to be equals to that, and now whenever we click on that, so in that situation we just want to delete our button. So let's space our delete button, save our file, and we also want to provide our expectation. So it's going to take a bit of time. So for that we are going to be using something called the wait for. So we are going to be waiting there for. So first of all we have to import there from the React testing library. So I'll use like wait for, come on, wait for, there we go. So it's going to allows us to wait for a specific thing. Okay, so here now we are going to be passing there, and now this is provide our expectation screen dot query by text, and let's just use our new to do inside there and not to be in the document. Okay, so then we want to just remove there. So now I'm gonna save my file, and that was it. So now let me just refresh my file, and yeah, all of our tests are now successfully passing, and this is how we are going to be testing the user interaction by using the user event library from the testing library.